When Hannah Cross walked into Manhattan Civil Court that morning, her husband Ethan sat across the aisle laughing, actually laughing, while his attorney counted down to what they thought would be her destruction. He'd frozen every account, cut every card, stripped away every penny she could use to defend herself. The empty chair beside her was supposed to prove she was broken. But Ethan Cross had made one fatal mistake. He never asked why Hannah kept checking her phone. He never wondered why she smiled just once when those courtroom doors finally opened. And he definitely never imagined that the woman in the white suit walking toward him, the one who made his own lawyer go pale, would introduce herself as Hannah's mother. Before we begin this story of justice and reckoning, if you're enjoying this tale of revenge done right, please hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far Hannah's story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all started. The February morning cut through Manhattan like a blade, sharp and merciless, the kind of cold that found every gap in your armor. Hannah Cross stood on the courthouse steps, her fingers numb around the strap of her worn leather bag, staring up at the gray stone building that would decide whether she walked away with dignity or nothing at all. She wore the only dress she had left, a simple gray sheath she'd owned for 6 years, back when Ethan still pretended to love her. No jewelry, no coat expensive enough to matter. She looked, she knew, exactly like what Ethan wanted the judge to see. A woman with nothing, worth nothing, entitled to nothing. The irony was almost funny. Almost. Inside, the courthouse hummed with the machinery of justice grinding forward. Lawyers in sharp suits negotiating in hallways, clerks shuffling files, the low murmur of lives being unmade and remade in courtrooms throughout the building. Hannah's heels clicked against marble floors as she made her way to courtroom 4C, each step feeling both too fast and not fast enough. She was 10 minutes early. Ethan would be 15 minutes late. That was his style. Make her wait. Make her sweat. Make sure everyone knew who held the power. Hannah pushed through the heavy oak doors and immediately felt the weight of emptiness. The gallery was nearly vacant, just a court reporter setting up her equipment, a clerk organizing files, and the judge's bench looming at the front like a throne waiting for its king. She chose a seat at the plaintiff's table, set her bag down carefully, and folded her hands in her lap. She didn't check her phone. Not yet. The minutes crawled. At 8:53, the doors opened again, and Malcolm Drake entered like a shark scenting blood. He was Ethan's attorney, ruthless, expensive, the kind of lawyer who won cases by attrition, by outspending and outlasting until the other side simply gave up. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Hannah's monthly rent. His silver hair swept back in a way that suggested both competence and cruelty. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her existence, just set his briefcase down at the defense table and began arranging his materials with the confidence of a man who'd already won. At 8:59, Ethan arrived. He looked good, and he knew it. Charcoal gray suit, Italian shoes, a tie that matched his eyes, blue, ice cold, and empty of anything resembling remorse. He was 38 but looked younger, the kind of handsome that had made Hannah's heart race when they first met 12 years ago, before she understood that beauty could be a weapon. Ethan grinned when he saw her sitting alone, that trademark smile that used to melt her and now just made her stomach turn. He leaned close to Malcolm, whispered something, and they both glanced her way. Malcolm's expression remained professional, but Ethan's eyes danced with something that looked like joy. He was enjoying this. All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Moreno presiding. Hannah stood, her legs steadier than she expected. Judge Moreno entered, a woman in her late 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, the kind of jurist who suffered fools poorly and liars not at all. She settled into her seat and surveyed the courtroom with the expression of someone who'd seen every trick and heard every excuse. Be seated. We're here for Cross versus Cross, divorce proceedings and asset distribution. Judge Moreno looked down at her notes, then up at the tables. Mr. Drake, I see you're representing the defendant Ethan Cross. And Mrs. Cross, I don't see anyone seated beside you. Are you representing yourself? Hannah stood. Your Honor, I'm expecting my attorney to arrive momentarily. I apologize for the delay. Ethan snorted, an actual audible snort of derision. Judge Moreno's gaze snapped to him like a laser. Mr. Cross, do you find something amusing about these proceedings? Ethan had the grace to look slightly abashed, but only slightly. "No, Your Honor. I apologize." "See that you remain respectful in my courtroom." Judge Moreno returned her attention to Hannah. "Mrs. Cross, how long do you need?" "Just a few minutes, Your Honor. They're on their way." Malcolm Drake rose smoothly. "Your Honor, if I may, we've been more than patient with Mrs. Cross throughout this process. She's failed to retain counsel, failed to respond adequately to discovery requests, and has demonstrated a pattern of delay that has wasted considerable time and resources. We'd like to request that we proceed immediately, and if Mrs. Cross cannot mount an adequate defense, we ask the court to consider a default judgment based on the uncontested prenuptial agreement she signed." Hannah felt her pulse kick up, but she kept her face calm. This was the play: pressure the judge, paint her as incompetent and disorganized, get a ruling before she could defend herself. "Mrs. Cross?" Judge Moreno's voice carried a note of concern now. "Do you have an attorney or not?" "I do, Your Honor. I just need—" "She doesn't have anyone," Ethan interrupted, his voice carrying across the courtroom with the casual cruelty of a man who believed himself untouchable. "She can't have anyone. She has no money, no resources, nothing, because she never earned anything in her entire life. She lived off me, spent my money, and now she wants to pretend she's entitled to half of what I built." "Mr. Cross," Judge Moreno's voice cracked like a whip, "you will remain silent unless directly addressed or asked to testify. Am I clear?" "Yes, Your Honor." But he was still smiling. Malcolm Drake stepped in, smooth as silk. "Your Honor, my client is understandably emotional, but the substance of his statement reflects the reality of this case. Mrs. Cross signed a prenuptial agreement 13 years ago that clearly delineates asset distribution in the event of divorce. She was represented by counsel at that time. The agreement is valid and binding. Mrs. Cross is entitled, per the agreement, to a modest settlement that reflects her limited contribution to the marital estate. We have the documentation right here." He lifted a thick folder, and Hannah felt the walls closing in. Because he was right, there was a prenup. She had signed it. On paper, she had almost no case at all. On paper. Judge Moreno looked at Hannah with something that might have been pity. "Mrs. Cross, I'm sympathetic to your situation, but I can't hold this courtroom indefinitely. If you don't have legal representation—" "I do, Your Honor." Hannah's voice came out stronger than she felt. "Please, just 2 more minutes." The judge glanced at the clock. 2 minutes, Mrs. Cross, that's all I can give you." Hannah nodded, sat down, and finally, checked her phone. One text message sent 3 minutes ago. Almost there. "Hold on. V." She set the phone face down and looked across the aisle. Ethan was whispering to Malcolm again, both of them glancing at her empty chair, at her cheap dress, at the way her hands trembled just slightly when she set down her phone. They thought they'd won. Ethan caught her eye and mouthed something that looked like, "Sorry, babe." But his eyes told the real truth. He wasn't sorry at all. He was thrilled. This was his victory lap, his final humiliation, his proof that he could discard her like trash and walk away richer, free, and vindicated. The thing was, Ethan had always underestimated her. From the beginning, he'd seen what he wanted to see. A young artist, talented but naive, beautiful but directionless. Someone he could mold and control and eventually discard when she stopped being useful. He never asked about her life before they met. Never wondered why she didn't talk about her family. Never questioned why she seemed so comfortable in certain spaces, why she could navigate high society events with ease, why she understood legal documents better than he expected. He assumed her silence was ignorance. It wasn't. 60 seconds left. Malcolm Drake stood again. "Your Honor, we've waited the allotted time. I respectfully request that we proceed with—" The courtroom doors opened. Not quietly, not tentatively. They opened, pushed wide by a woman in a white suit that looked like it cost more than Hannah's entire wardrobe, a woman who walked like she owned not just the room, but the building and possibly the entire legal system. She was in her early 60s, tall and striking, her silver hair cut in a sharp bob that framed a face that was beautiful in the way weapons are beautiful, precise, purposeful, dangerous. She carried a slim leather briefcase in one hand, and behind her came 3 more people, 2 men and a woman, all in immaculate business attire, all carrying larger cases that suggested they were ready for war. The lead woman's heels clicked across the marble with the rhythm of an execution drum. Malcolm Drake went white. Not pale, not worried. White. The color drained from his face like someone had opened a valve, and his hand actually trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. Because Malcolm Drake had been practicing law for 32 years, and he knew exactly who had just walked into the courtroom. Vivian Locke. She was a legend in legal circles. The kind of attorney who didn't take cases unless she knew she'd win, who charged fees that made corporate CEOs weep, who had argued before the Supreme Court 6 times and won 5. She worked out of D.C., handled only the biggest, most complex cases, and was known for 2 things: brilliant legal strategy and absolutely zero mercy for opponents who played dirty. And she was walking straight toward Hannah's table. "Your Honor," Vivian said, her voice carrying effortless authority. "I apologize for my tardiness. Traffic was unavoidable. I'm Vivian Locke, and I'm here to represent my client, Hannah Cross." Judge Moreno blinked. "Ms. Locke, this is unexpected." "I imagine it is, Your Honor." Vivian set her briefcase down and turned to face the courtroom. Her team fanned out behind her, positioning themselves with military precision. "But I assure you, my representation is properly documented and filed with the court as of 3 days ago. If there's any question about my standing—" "No question at all," Judge Moreno said quickly. "Welcome, counselor. Please, proceed." Vivian nodded, then turned to Hannah. For just a moment, just one fleeting second, her professional mask slipped, and something soft moved across her face. Something that looked like regret, or love, or perhaps both. "Hello, Hannah," she said quietly. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Hello, Mom." The courtroom erupted. Not literally, this wasn't a movie, but the energy shifted like a tectonic plate moving. Malcolm Drake actually stumbled backward. Ethan's face went through a series of expressions so rapid they blurred together: confusion, shock, anger, fear. Judge Moreno's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "I'm sorry, did you just say—" "Yes, Your Honor." Vivian's voice remained perfectly calm. "Hannah Cross is my daughter. We've been estranged for many years due to circumstances I deeply regret, but recent events have brought us back into contact. When she informed me of her current legal situation, I made myself available immediately." She turned to face Ethan and Malcolm, and her expression could have frozen the Hudson River. "And now that I'm here, I have so many questions about how this case has been handled." Malcolm found his voice, though it came out rougher than before. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The timing is suspicious, the conflict of interest—" "There's no conflict," Vivian interrupted smoothly. "I'm representing my daughter in a civil divorce proceeding. That's not only legal, it's my right as both an attorney and a parent who has been absent far too long." "But the prenuptial agreement," Malcolm started, "was signed under duress after inadequate legal counsel and contains provisions that may well be unconscionable under New York law." Vivian opened her briefcase and withdrew a document. "I have here a sworn affidavit from my daughter detailing the circumstances under which she signed that agreement. She was 24 years old, had been dating Mr. Cross for only 8 months, and was told that the wedding would be canceled if she didn't sign immediately. The attorney who represented her was chosen and paid for by Mr. Cross, spent less than 30 minutes reviewing the document with her, and never explained several key provisions that we will be challenging today." Malcolm's jaw tightened. That's a serious accusation, and one that's convenient to make 13 years after the fact. "Oh, I have more than accusations." Vivian nodded to one of her team members, who immediately began distributing folders to the judge, the clerk, and opposing counsel. "I have text messages recovered from Mr. Cross's phone. Yes, Mr. Cross, we subpoenaed your cell carrier, in which he explicitly discusses locking down the prenup before Hannah gets smart enough to ask questions. I have emails to the attorney in question in which Mr. Cross instructs him to make it quick and painless, and offers a bonus for rapid completion. And I have financial records showing that Mr. Cross paid that attorney a $15,000 bonus 3 days after the wedding, a bonus that was never disclosed to my daughter." Ethan shot to his feet. "This is insane. You can't just come in here with—" "Sit down, Mr. Cross." Judge Moreno's voice cut through the courtroom like a chainsaw. "I will not warn you again." Ethan sat, but his hands were clenched into fists, his face flushed with rage. Vivian continued as if he hadn't spoken. "But the prenup is actually the least interesting part of this case, Your Honor. Because while my client signed an agreement 13 years ago distributing assets in a certain way, that agreement was based on a specific understanding of what those assets were. Mr. Cross represented himself as a moderately successful real estate developer with assets totaling approximately $3.2 million at the time of marriage. My daughter was led to believe that the prenup protected a reasonable estate and that her modest settlement in case of divorce was proportional to that estate." She paused, letting the silence build. "Mr. Cross lied." Malcolm stood quickly. "Your Honor, these are inflammatory accusations without evidence?" Vivian smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Mr. Drake, you and I both know better than to make accusations without evidence. I don't work that way. I never have." She nodded again, and another team member began setting up a laptop and projector. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to present a forensic financial analysis conducted by Whitmore and Associates, one of the leading financial investigation firms in the country. They've spent the last 72 hours since I took this case digging into Mr. Cross's actual financial holdings." Judge Moreno leaned forward. "Proceed." The projector hummed to life, and suddenly the courtroom wall was filled with a financial flowchart that looked like a map of a criminal empire. Shell companies, offshore accounts, hidden properties, investments buried under layers of corporate structures. Vivian walked to the projection, her silhouette cutting through the data like a knife. "Mr. Cross currently controls assets worth approximately $47 million, she said calmly. "Not $3.2 million, $47 million. He has properties in the Cayman Islands, investment accounts in Luxembourg, and ownership stakes in 6 different companies that he's never disclosed to my client. He has been systematically hiding assets throughout the duration of the marriage, preparing for this exact moment." She turned to face Ethan directly. "You thought you were so clever, didn't you? Freeze her accounts, cut her cards, make sure she couldn't afford a lawyer, isolate her, humiliate her, force her to accept pennies while you walked away with everything. You thought she was alone." Vivian's voice dropped, became almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. "She was never alone, Mr. Cross. She just let you think she was." Hannah watched Ethan's face as the truth crashed over him like a wave. This wasn't going to be the easy victory he'd imagined. This wasn't going to be Hannah crying while he magnanimously offered her enough money to survive on. This was going to be a fight, and he was already losing. Malcolm Drake had recovered some of his composure, though his voice still carried an edge of panic. "Your Honor, even if Ms. Locke's financial analysis is accurate, and we dispute these findings, it doesn't change the fundamental validity of the prenuptial agreement. Mrs. Cross agreed to certain terms. She signed a legal document." "Under fraudulent pretenses," Vivian countered. "The agreement specifically states that Mr. Cross disclosed all assets and liabilities known to him at the time of execution. He didn't. He lied about his worth by a factor of 15. That's not a technicality, Mr. Drake. That's fraud. And it invalidates the entire agreement." Judge Moreno was reading through the documents Vivian's team had distributed, her expression growing darker with each page. "Ms. Locke, these are serious allegations. Do you have documentation to support every claim on this chart?" "Every single one, Your Honor. Bank statements, incorporation documents, property deeds, investment records. It's all in the supplementary filing my team submitted this morning. 2,000 pages of documentation proving that Ethan Cross has been lying to my daughter for over a decade." "This is a witch hunt," Ethan burst out, ignoring the judge's previous warnings. "She's making all of this up because she—" "Mr. Cross, if you interrupt these proceedings one more time, I will hold you in contempt." Judge Moreno's voice was ice. "Do you understand me?" Ethan's mouth snapped shut, but his eyes burned with fury. Vivian wasn't done. "Your Honor, there's one more thing the court should know before we proceed." She pulled out another document, this one much thinner. "I'd like to enter into evidence a recording made by my client 3 weeks ago, on January 29th, in which Mr. Cross explicitly states his intentions regarding this divorce." She pressed a button on her laptop, and suddenly Ethan's voice filled the courtroom, not through the projector's small speakers, but through a professional sound system one of her team members had quietly set up. The voice was unmistakably Ethan's, captured clearly despite the background noise of what sounded like a restaurant. And the best part is she'll get nothing. I made sure of that years ago. The prenup is airtight, and I've got everything hidden where she'll never find it. She could hire a lawyer, but who's going to work for free? And even if someone did, they'd never figure out the offshore stuff. I've been moving money for years, babe. She thinks we're worth maybe $5 million. She has no idea. A woman's voice, sultry and amused. And what if she fights anyway? Ethan's laugh, cold and dismissive. With what? I froze all the accounts last week. Canceled her cards. She's got maybe $300 in cash in her pathetic little art studio that makes no money. She can't fight. She can barely survive. By the time the divorce is final, she'll be so desperate she'll sign anything just to get a roof over her head. You're terrible. The woman's voice, but she sounded delighted rather than horrified. I'm practical. Hannah's pretty, but she's not smart. Never was. She married me because I was rich and successful, and now she's learning what happens when you depend on a man instead of making something of yourself. It's going to be fun watching her beg. The recording ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Hannah felt something break loose in her chest. Not grief, not anymore, but a kind of clean, clear anger that felt almost like relief. Because there it was. The truth of what Ethan thought of her, what he'd always thought of her, laid bare for everyone to hear. Judge Moreno's face was carved from stone. Mr. Drake, do you wish to contest the authenticity of that recording? Malcolm looked like a man drowning. Your Honor, I'd need to consult with my client before— The recording was made in a public restaurant with no expectation of privacy, Vivian said smoothly. My client was dining at a nearby table with a friend when she overheard her husband discussing their divorce with his mistress. She had every right to record what she heard, and the chain of custody has been properly documented. Ethan's face had gone from red to white to a mottled purple that suggested his blood pressure had reached dangerous levels. That's entrapment. That's not what entrapment means, Vivian said coldly. And the fact that your first response is a legal defense rather than denial tells everyone in this room exactly how truthful that recording is. Judge Moreno set down the papers she'd been reading and folded her hands on the bench. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much ugliness and had finally reached her limit. We're going to take a brief recess, 20 minutes. Mr. Drake, I suggest you use that time to have a very serious conversation with your client about his options here. Because based on what I've seen and heard this morning, Mr. Cross is facing not just an unfavorable divorce settlement, but possible criminal charges for fraud, perjury, and financial misconduct. She stood, and everyone rose automatically. Miss Locke, Mrs. Cross, I'll see you back here in 20 minutes. Mr. Drake, Mr. Cross, I strongly suggest you consider whether continuing to contest these proceedings is in your client's best interest. The gavel came down like a gunshot, and Judge Moreno swept out of the courtroom. The moment she was gone, Ethan exploded. You bitch! He screamed at Hannah, lunging toward her table. You set me up! You lying, manipulative— 2 court officers were on him immediately, restraining him before he could get close. Malcolm grabbed his arm, hissing something urgent in his ear, but Ethan was beyond reason now. You think you're so smart? He shouted as the officers hauled him toward the exit. You think you've won? I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you never work again, never show your art again, never— The doors closed behind him, muffling his rage to a distant echo. Hannah sat very still, her hands folded on the table, breathing slowly and evenly. She was distantly aware that she was shaking, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline, pure and clean, the body's response to a threat that was finally being neutralized. Vivian dismissed her team with a quiet word, and they filed out efficiently, leaving mother and daughter alone in the courtroom except for the court reporter packing up her equipment in the corner. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Vivian sat down in the chair beside Hannah, the chair that had been empty all morning, the chair that Ethan had mocked, and said quietly, I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. Hannah turned to look at her mother, really look at her, for the first time in 15 years. Vivian's face was older, marked by time and stress, and the weight of cases won and lost. But her eyes, gray-blue, like Hannah's own, were the same. Sharp, intelligent, and right now filled with something that looked like pain. "Why now?" Hannah asked. "After all this time, why did you come?" Vivian's jaw tightened. "Because you called me. After 15 years of silence, you called me, and you told me what he was doing to you, and I—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't let another man destroy my daughter's life while I stood by and did nothing." "You didn't do nothing last time," Hannah said quietly. "You did what you thought was right. You warned me about Dad. You told me he was dangerous. I didn't listen. You were 22 years old and in love. You shouldn't have had to listen. I should have found a better way to protect you than ultimatums." Vivian reached out, hesitated, then gently took Hannah's hand. Her skin was warm, and her grip was steady. "I've regretted how I handled things every day since you left. Every single day. When you called last week, when I heard your voice after all this time, I thought I was hallucinating." Hannah felt tears building but refused to let them fall. "Not yet. Not here. I didn't know if you'd come. I didn't know if you'd even take my call." "Oh, sweetheart." Vivian's voice cracked, just slightly. "I would cross the country on my hands and knees if you needed me. I would burn down the legal system itself if it meant keeping you safe. I'm just sorry it took you being in crisis for me to get the chance to prove it." They sat together in the quiet courtroom, hands linked, two women who'd lost years to pride and pain and were just beginning to find their way back to each other. Finally, Hannah said, "You really have documentation for everything? All those offshore accounts? All the hidden assets?" Vivian's expression shifted back to professional mode, though her hand remained on Hannah's. "Every single claim. I don't bluff in court, Hannah. Ever. I have a team of forensic accountants who've been working around the clock since you first called me. Ethan Cross has been very clever about hiding his money, but he wasn't clever enough. Nobody ever is, not when you know where to look. And the prenup? Can you really get it thrown out?" "Almost certainly. Between the fraudulent financial disclosure, the coercion around the signing, and the unconscionable terms, yes. I'd say we have better than 90% odds of invalidating it entirely, which means we go to standard asset distribution under New York law." She smiled, sharp and satisfied. "Which means you're entitled to half of everything, and everything is approximately $47 million. Hannah's breath caught. $23.5 million. It was an incomprehensible number, more money than she'd ever imagined having, more than enough to live on for the rest of her life without ever worrying about rent or groceries or whether she could afford to keep making art. It was also, she realized with a kind of grim satisfaction, going to destroy Ethan completely. "He'll fight," she said. "He won't just give up." "Of course he'll fight. Men like Ethan always do. They can't conceive of a world where they don't win, where women they've underestimated don't stay underestimated." Vivian's smile turned cold. "But here's what he doesn't understand. I've been doing this for 35 years. I've taken down men twice as powerful as him with half the evidence I have against him. He's already lost, Hannah. He just doesn't know it yet." The courtroom doors opened again and Malcolm Drake entered, looking like he'd aged 10 years and 20 minutes. Behind him came Ethan, subdued now, his earlier rage replaced with something that looked almost like fear. Vivian stood, smoothing her white suit. "Showtime," she said quietly to Hannah, then louder. "Mr. Drake, I trust you've had time to reconsider your position?" Malcolm cleared his throat. "Ms. Locke, my client maintains that the prenuptial agreement is valid, and that your allegations regarding hidden assets are exaggerated. However, in the interest of moving toward a reasonable settlement, we're prepared to discuss modifications to the original terms." How generous! Vivian's tone could have stripped paint. "Unfortunately, my client is no longer interested in modifications. We want the prenup invalidated entirely, full asset disclosure, and equitable distribution according to New York state law." "That's absurd." "What's absurd, Mr. Drake, is your client committing fraud and perjury and then expecting leniency. What's absurd is spending the morning listening to him mock my daughter for being broke when he's the one who deliberately impoverished her. What's absurd is that you're still trying to defend a case you know you've already lost." Judge Moreno re-entered, and everyone rose again. She settled into her seat and looked between the two legal teams with an expression that suggested she'd reached the end of her patience. "Have we reached any agreements during the recess?" Malcolm spoke quickly. "Your Honor, we're prepared to discuss settlement terms that—" "No settlement," Vivian interrupted. "Your Honor, we're requesting that this case proceed to full hearing. We have significant additional evidence to present, including testimony from multiple witnesses regarding Mr. Cross's conduct during the marriage, his financial deception, and his attempts to intimidate and impoverish my client." Judge Moreno nodded slowly. "Given the serious nature of these allegations, I'm inclined to agree. We'll schedule a full hearing for—" She consulted her calendar. "2 weeks from today. In the meantime, I'm issuing several temporary orders. All marital assets are hereby frozen, pending full disclosure and evaluation. Mr. Cross is ordered to provide complete financial documentation within 72 hours. Mrs. Cross is granted temporary use of the marital home and a temporary support allowance of $15,000 per month to be paid by Mr. Cross." Ethan's face went white. $15,000. "Your Honor, that's excessive. I can't—" "You told your mistress you'd hidden millions of dollars, Mr. Cross. I think you can afford to support your wife adequately while we sort out exactly how much you've been lying about." Judge Moreno's voice was arctic. "Anything else, counsel?" "Just one thing, Your Honor." Vivian pulled out yet another document. "I'd like to request a restraining order. My client has reason to believe Mr. Cross may attempt to intimidate or harass her during these proceedings." "Based on what evidence?" "Based on his behavior in this courtroom this morning, Your Honor. He physically attempted to approach my client in a threatening manner before being restrained by court officers." Judge Moreno didn't hesitate. "Granted. Mr. Cross, you are to have no contact with your wife except through attorneys. You will stay at least 500 feet away from her at all times. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. Clear?" Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good. We're adjourned until the hearing date. Ms. Locke, I'll expect your full documentation within 1 week." "You'll have it in 3 days, Your Honor." The gavel came down again, and this time, when Judge Moreno left, Hannah felt like she could breathe for the first time in months. Vivian turned to her, and for just a moment, the legendary attorney disappeared and only the mother remained. "You did beautifully," she said softly. "I'm so proud of you." Hannah stood on shaky legs, and before she could second-guess herself, she stepped forward and hugged her mother for the first time in 15 years. Vivian's arms came around her immediately, strong and sure, and Hannah heard her mother's breath catch in a sound that might have been a sob. "I've got you," Vivian whispered against her hair. "I've got you, sweetheart, and I'm never letting go again." Behind them, she could hear Malcolm Drake trying to calm Ethan down, could hear Ethan's voice rising in panic as the reality of his situation finally sank in. But Hannah didn't turn around, didn't look back. She just held on to her mother and thought about what came next. A hearing that would expose every lie, every manipulation, every cruel calculation Ethan Cross had made. And she smiled. Because sometimes justice didn't look like revenge. Sometimes it looked like a woman in a white suit walking through courthouse doors. Sometimes it looked like the truth, finally spoken after years of silence. Sometimes it looked like going home. The penthouse felt different when Hannah walked through the door that afternoon. The same marble floors, the same floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, the same expensive furniture that Ethan had chosen without consulting her. But somehow the space had transformed from a prison into simply a place she was legally entitled to occupy, protected by a court order and her mother's legal arsenal. She set her bag down on the entry table and stood for a moment in the silence, letting the weight of the morning settle over her like snow. Her phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. "Get some rest. We have a strategy session tomorrow at 10 a.m. My office. I'm sending a car." Hannah smiled despite her exhaustion and typed back, "I can take the subway." The response came immediately. "Humor your mother. The car will be there at 9:30. She was about to reply when she heard the lock turning in the front door. Her heart jumped into her throat. Ethan had keys. Ethan could still get in. But then she remembered the restraining order, remembered that he was legally barred from coming within 500 feet of her. The door opened, and a young man in a building maintenance uniform stepped inside, looking surprised to see her. "Oh, Mrs. Cross, I'm sorry I didn't realize you were home. Mr. Cross called and asked us to change the locks. He said you'd moved out and—" "Stop." Hannah's voice came out harder than she intended, and the maintenance worker froze. She took a breath, softened her tone. "I haven't moved out. Mr. Cross doesn't have the authority to change these locks. There's a court order granting me temporary residence here." The young man looked genuinely distressed. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. He was very insistent, said it was urgent, and I should have checked with management first." "It's okay. You didn't know." Hannah pulled out her phone and found the PDF of the temporary order Vivian had sent her. "Here, this is from Manhattan Civil Court. I have legal right to this property until the divorce is finalized. If Mr. Cross contacts the building again about locks or access or anything else, you need to tell him to go through his attorney." The maintenance worker read the document on her screen, his face going pale. "Oh God, he's going to be furious. He specifically said—" "What he said doesn't matter anymore." Hannah felt a strange sense of power saying those words out loud. "The court order supersedes anything he tells you. And if he tries to force his way in here or intimidate building staff into letting him in, he'll be arrested. So please, make sure everyone on staff understands that." "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I'll inform the building manager immediately." He backed toward the door, still apologetic. "I'm really sorry about this." "You were just doing your job. It's fine." When he left, Hannah locked the door behind him, with the locks that were still hers, still functional, still keeping Ethan out. She leaned against the door and closed her eyes, feeling the reality of her situation crystallize further. Ethan was already trying to undermine the court order. Less than 4 hours after Judge Moreno issued her ruling, he was already testing boundaries, already looking for ways to regain control. He wasn't going to stop, not until he was forced to. Her phone rang, and she almost didn't answer when she saw the unknown number, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Hannah, it's Malcolm Drake." She straightened, suddenly alert. "Mr. Drake, you know you're supposed to go through my attorney." I know. This isn't about the case. Not exactly." He sounded tired, strained, nothing like the confident predator from the courtroom. "Look, I've been practicing law for a long time. I've represented a lot of difficult clients, but I need to know something, off the record, one human being to another." Hannah waited. "How much of what your mother presented today is real? The offshore accounts, the hidden properties, is that all documented, or was she bluffing?" "Why would I tell you that?" "Because I need to know if I should withdraw from this case." Malcolm's voice dropped. "Ethan has been my client for 3 years. He's paid me well, and I've won cases for him. Property disputes, contract negotiations, the usual stuff. But if he's been lying to me about his assets, if he's been committing actual fraud, Hannah, I could lose my license for participating in that kind of deception, even unknowingly." Hannah walked to the windows, looking out at the park where joggers traced paths through the winter landscape, oblivious to the legal war being waged in penthouses and courtrooms around them. "Every single document is real," she said quietly. "Every offshore account, every shell company, every hidden property. My mother doesn't make accusations she can't prove. She has bank statements, incorporation papers, property deeds, everything. Ethan has been lying to both of us, Mr. Drake. The only difference is that I suspected it, and you didn't." Silence on the other end of the line, then, "Jesus Christ. If you're smart, you'll withdraw before the hearing. Let him find another attorney willing to defend the indefensible. He'll sue me for abandonment. Better than losing your license for fraud." Hannah kept her voice neutral, almost kind. "You seem like a decent person who made the mistake of trusting a client who didn't deserve it. Don't compound that mistake by going down with his ship." Malcolm exhaled slowly. "Your mother is Vivian Locke." "Yes. I argued against her once, 12 years ago. Patent infringement case. She destroyed me so completely that my client settled before we even got to closing arguments. She's very good at what she does." "That's an understatement." Another pause. "Hannah, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I didn't know he was freezing your accounts. I didn't know he was planning to leave you destitute. He told me you were just being greedy, that you wanted money you hadn't earned. I should have looked deeper." "Yes," Hannah said simply. "You should have." She hung up before he could respond. The apartment felt too large suddenly, too empty, filled with furniture and art that Ethan had chosen, that reflected his taste and his ego. Hannah walked through the room slowly, cataloging what she actually wanted to keep versus what was just expensive debris from a marriage that should have ended years ago. In the master bedroom, she found her clothes still in the closet. Ethan hadn't had time to dispose of them yet, though she suspected that had been on his agenda. She pulled out a suitcase and began packing what mattered. Her favorite jeans, comfortable sweaters, the vintage leather jacket her mother had given her for her 21st birthday, back when they were still speaking. She stopped, holding the jacket, remembering that day. They'd had brunch at a cafe in Georgetown, and Vivian had presented the jacket with a speech about how Hannah was becoming her own person, stepping into her power, ready to take on the world. 6 months later, Hannah had met her father for coffee, and he'd told her things about her mother, terrible things, believable things, about affairs and lies and a woman who put her career above everything, including her daughter. He'd been so convincing, so hurt, so seemingly honest, and Hannah, young and naive and desperate to believe that someone loved her unconditionally, had believed him. She'd cut off contact with Vivian without explanation, blocked her number, returned her letters unopened. When she met Ethan 2 years later, she'd told him her mother was dead. It was easier than explaining the truth. Now, holding the jacket Vivian had given her, Hannah felt the full weight of what she'd lost. 15 years of her mother's life, 15 years of guidance, support, love, all because she'd believed her father's lies about the one person who'd actually been trying to protect her. Her phone rang again. This time it was a number she recognized. Her father, Graham Locke. Hannah stared at the screen, watching it ring, debating whether to answer. She hadn't spoken to him in 3 years, not since she'd finally understood what kind of man he really was. But curiosity won out. "Hello, Dad." "Hannah!" His voice was warm, jovial, the voice of a man who believed charm could smooth over any inconvenience. "I heard you had quite the morning in court. Congratulations, sweetheart." "How did you hear about that?" "Oh, you know how it is. Legal community in New York is small. Word travels fast, especially when Vivian Locke makes a dramatic entrance." He chuckled. "I have to say, I'm impressed. You played that perfectly, letting Ethan think he'd won, then bringing in the big guns. Very strategic." Hannah felt ice forming in her stomach. "What do you want?" "Want? I don't want anything. I'm your father. I'm calling to congratulate you and to see if you need any help. This must be a difficult time." "I have all the help I need." "From Vivian, yes, I heard." His tone shifted slightly, became more careful. "Hannah, I know you and your mother have reconciled, and that's wonderful, really. But I hope you're being cautious. Your mother is brilliant, no question, but she has her own agenda. She always does. Her agenda right now is protecting me from a man who tried to leave me homeless. I'm okay with that agenda." Graham sighed, the sound of a patient parent dealing with a stubborn child. Of course. I'm just saying, be careful. Vivian has a tendency to take over, to make everything about her victory instead of your actual well-being. I've seen it before." "You mean like how you took over my life for 15 years by lying about her?" Hannah's voice stayed calm, but her grip on the phone tightened. "Or like how you convinced me to cut off contact with the one parent who was actually looking out for me?" Silence. Then, "That's not fair, Hannah. I was trying to protect you from what? From a mother who loved me? From someone who would have helped me see through Ethan's bullshit years ago?" She walked back to the windows, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "I know what you did, Dad. I figured it out. The affairs, the financial manipulation, the way you turned me against Mom so she couldn't tell me the truth about you. I know all of it. Hannah, you're under a lot of stress right now. You're angry at Ethan and you're projecting—" "Don't!" Her voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare tell me what I'm feeling or why. I'm done being manipulated by men who think I'm too stupid to see through them." Another pause, longer this time. When Graham spoke again, the warmth was gone. "I see. Vivian's been filling your head with her version of events. How convenient for her." Mom hasn't told me anything about you that I didn't already figure out on my own. The difference is that now I have someone who won't lie to me when I ask for the truth. Fine. Graham's voice went cold. If that's how you want to play this. But don't come crying to me when Vivian inevitably puts her career ahead of you again. That's what she does, Hannah. That's who she is. Goodbye, Dad. She hung up and blocked his number immediately, her hands shaking slightly. That was another bridge burned, another connection severed. But unlike cutting off Vivian 15 years ago, this felt clean, necessary, like amputating an infected limb. The apartment phone rang, the landline that Ethan had insisted on keeping because it was more professional. Hannah almost didn't answer, but the caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Mrs. Cross. A woman's voice, young and uncertain. My name is Nina Hale. I need to talk to you about Ethan. Hannah's breath caught. Nina Hale. The mistress. The woman who'd been with Ethan at that restaurant, laughing while he described how he'd destroy his wife. How did you get this number? Ethan gave it to me ages ago. Look, I know this is weird, and you have every right to hang up on me, but please, just give me 5 minutes. There are things you need to know. Hannah walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and sat down at the island. I'm listening. I didn't know he was married. Not at first. Nina's words came out in a rush. When we met, he told me he was divorced, that it had been finalized 2 years ago. He showed me pictures of this penthouse and said he'd bought it after the divorce as a fresh start. I believed him. When did you find out the truth? 6 months ago. I saw his wedding ring in his gym bag. He'd forgotten to take it off before we met up. When I confronted him, he admitted he was still married but said you were separated, that the divorce was in progress, that you were the one dragging it out. Nina's voice cracked. He made you sound like a monster, Hannah. He said you were trying to take everything from him out of spite, that you'd never loved him, that you were just a gold digger who'd trapped him with pregnancy threats. Hannah almost laughed. I've never been pregnant. We talked about kids early on, and I said I wanted to wait until my career was more established. He agreed. He told me you'd had 3 abortions because you didn't want to ruin your body. The casual cruelty of it took Hannah's breath away. Why are you telling me this? Because I heard the recording, the one from the restaurant. Nina was crying now, her voice thick with tears. Someone from the court clerk's office is friends with my roommate. She told her about what happened this morning, about the evidence your mother presented. And when I heard what Ethan said about you, how he talked about destroying you for fun, I realized he's been lying to me the entire time, about everything. Nina, I appreciate you calling, but I don't know what you want me to say. You slept with my husband. You were there when he planned my financial destruction. I know I'm complicit, but he's dangerous, Hannah, more dangerous than you realize. Nina took a shuddering breath. 2 nights ago, after he found out about the court date, he came to my apartment. He was drunk, angrier than I'd ever seen him. He started talking about what he'd do if he lost the case. He said he'd make sure you paid, that you'd regret ever challenging him. He grabbed my arm so hard he left bruises when I suggested maybe he should just settle. Hannah felt cold spreading through her chest. Did he threaten you? Not directly, but the look in his eyes. Hannah, I've dated bad men before. I know what dangerous looks like. And Ethan scared me in a way no one ever has. He wasn't angry like a normal person. He was angry like someone who genuinely believes the rules don't apply to him, that he can do whatever he wants without consequences. You need to go to the police. And tell them what? My married boyfriend got drunk and grabbed my arm? They'll laugh me out of the station. Nina paused. But I have something better. I have text messages. Hundreds of them. Some where he brags about hiding money from you. Some where he talks about the prenup being insurance against you ever getting smart. Some where he discusses moving assets overseas. I don't know if they're useful for your case, but they're useful. Hannah's mind was already racing. Nina, I need you to do something. I'm going to give you my attorney's contact information. Her name is Vivian Locke. You need to call her tonight and tell her everything you just told me, and you need to send her those text messages. Will she... I know I'm not exactly innocent here. She'll protect you if you help us. That's how she works. Hannah grabbed a pen and paper, wrote down Vivian's number. I'm texting this to you right now. Call her within the hour. Tell her I sent you. And Nina? Yes? Get away from Ethan tonight. Go stay with friends, family, anyone. Don't tell him where you are. Just disappear. You think he'd actually hurt me? I think he's desperate, cornered, and losing control of a situation he was certain he'd dominate. That makes him unpredictable. So yes, I think he might hurt you. Don't give him the chance. After they hung up, Hannah forwarded Vivian's number to Nina's cell, then sent her mother a quick text. Ethan's mistress is going to call you. Listen to what she has to say. It's important. Vivian's response came back immediately. Already intrigued. Are you okay? Yes, just tired. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we build the case that buries him. Hannah set down her phone and looked around the penthouse again. This place that had been her cage for so many years felt different now, less like a prison and more like a trophy she'd just won. Temporary, maybe, but hers nonetheless. She ordered Chinese food from the place down the street that Ethan had always refused to try because it wasn't upscale enough, then settled onto the couch with her laptop and began going through her own files. Old emails, old text messages, anything that might be useful for the hearing. She found the email from 10 years ago, when she'd asked Ethan if they could use some of their savings to help her rent a proper art studio. His response had been brief. We don't have that kind of money to waste on hobbies. Focus on being a better wife instead. She found the text from 8 years ago after she'd sold 3 paintings at a gallery show. Nice work. Try not to let it go to your head. You're still not a real artist. She found the voicemail from 5 years ago, drunk Ethan calling her from a business trip. You're so fucking lucky I married you. You'd be nothing without me. Don't forget that. Piece by piece, message by message, she assembled a portrait of psychological abuse that had been so gradual, so normalized, that she'd almost stopped seeing it as abuse at all. Her food arrived, and she ate lo mein straight from the container while reading through documents, occasionally taking screenshots and sending them to a new folder labeled Evidence. Around 10 p.m., her phone rang again. Vivian. Did Nina call you? Hannah asked immediately. She did. And Hannah, this changes everything. Vivian sounded energized, the way she probably sounded before big trials. The text messages she has are devastating. Ethan explicitly discusses hiding assets, manipulating the prenup, planning to impoverish you, but more importantly, she's willing to testify. She is? Once I explained that she could face charges herself for helping him hide assets if she stayed silent, yes. She's terrified of Ethan and terrified of going to jail. She'll testify that he told her about the offshore accounts, that he bragged about the prenup being fraudulent, all of it. Hannah felt something loosen in her chest. So we have him. We have him 6 ways from Sunday, between the financial forensics, the recorded conversation, Nina's testimony, and your own documentation of his behavior. Hannah, this case is going to be a bloodbath. For him. Good. Vivian was quiet for a moment. How are you doing? Really? Hannah looked around the empty penthouse, at the life she'd built on lies and control, at the debris of a marriage that had been doomed from the start. I'm angry, she said honestly. I'm angry that I wasted 13 years on him. I'm angry that I believed his version of me instead of trusting my own instincts. I'm angry that I cut you out of my life because I was too naive to see through Dad's manipulation. I'm just angry. Anger is good, Vivian said softly. Anger means you're finally seeing the situation clearly. Just don't let it consume you. Use it, channel it, but don't let it define you. Is that what you did? After Dad? Vivian exhaled slowly. Your father and I had a complicated marriage, Hannah. And when it ended, I let my anger drive me for a long time. I worked 18-hour days, took every difficult case, built my reputation on being merciless in court. And I won. Over and over again, I won. But I also lost time with you. I lost years I can't get back because I was too busy being angry to be your mother. That wasn't all your fault. Dad manipulated me. I made the choice to believe him. You were 22. You believed what you needed to believe to make sense of your world. I don't blame you for that. I blame myself for not fighting harder to stay in your life, for not making you understand that no matter what Graham said, I loved you. I always loved you. Hannah felt tears sliding down her face now, silent and steady. I love you too, Mom. I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner. You're saying it now. That's what matters. Vivian's voice was thick with emotion. Get some sleep, sweetheart. Tomorrow we start building your new life. After they hung up, Hannah sat in the quiet penthouse and let herself cry. For the years lost, for the marriage that had been a prison, for the girl she'd been who'd believed love looked like control. But she also cried with something like relief, because for the first time in over a decade, she had someone on her side who couldn't be bought, manipulated, or frightened into abandoning her. She had her mother back, and together they were going to make Ethan Cross understand exactly what he'd lost when he underestimated the quiet woman who'd signed his prenup. Hannah cleaned up the empty food containers, washed her face, and went to bed in the master bedroom, the bedroom she'd shared with Ethan, but which now felt like hers alone. She slept better than she had in months. When she woke the next morning, there were 17 missed calls from Ethan's number and a series of increasingly frantic text messages. You can't do this to me. I made you who you are. Without me, you're nothing. This is all your mother's fault. She's manipulating you. I'll give you one more chance to be reasonable. Drop the case and I'll give you $500,000. That's more than generous. Answer me. You're going to regret this, Hannah. I promise you that. Hannah took screenshots of every message and forwarded them to Vivian with a simple note. He's unraveling. Vivian's response, perfect. Let him. See you at 10. The car arrived exactly at 9:30, a sleek black sedan with a professional driver who greeted Hannah by name and held the door for her. As they pulled away from the penthouse, she saw someone standing across the street, a figure in a dark coat, watching the building. It might have been paranoia. It might have been nothing. But as the car merged into traffic, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan wasn't done trying to control her. Not yet. The fight was just beginning. Vivian's office occupied the entire 42nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown, the kind of space that announced success before you even stepped through the doors. Hannah rode the elevator up with her stomach doing nervous flips, watching the floor numbers climb while her reflection stared back at her from the polished steel walls. The elevator opened directly into a reception area that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood that power didn't need to shout. Soft gray walls, modern art that was actually good, furniture that whispered expense without being ostentatious. A young man at the reception desk looked up and smiled with genuine warmth. Mrs. Cross, Mrs. Locke is expecting you. Conference room 2, straight down the hall. Hannah followed the directions and found herself in a glass-walled conference room where Vivian sat with 3 other people, all of them surrounded by documents that covered the entire length of the table. Vivian looked up when Hannah entered, and her expression transformed from professional focus to maternal concern in an instant. Good morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep? Better than expected, actually. Hannah closed the door behind her and took in the scene. This looks serious. It is serious, but it's also going extremely well. Vivian gestured to the others in the room. Hannah, this is my team. Marcus Whitmore, forensic accountant, Jennifer Song, private investigator, and David Brennan, litigation support. Everyone, this is my daughter. They each greeted her with professional courtesy, but Hannah could see the curiosity in their eyes. They knew the history, or at least some version of it. Marcus spoke first, pushing a folder toward Hannah. Mrs. Cross, I've been analyzing your husband's financial records for 72 hours now, and I have to tell you, this is one of the most elaborate asset-hiding schemes I've seen outside of actual organized crime. He's been planning this for years. Hannah sat down slowly. How far back does it go? At least 8 years, possibly longer, but the trail gets murky before that. Marcus opened the folder and pulled out a flowchart that looked like a family tree designed by someone on hallucinogens. He started with simple offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, which is pretty standard for people trying to hide money. But then he got creative. Shell companies in Delaware that own properties in Panama. Investment accounts in Luxembourg that are owned by those shell companies. Cryptocurrency wallets that he's been funding through a business account that's technically owned by a company that doesn't exist. How much? Hannah asked quietly. Total? We're estimating between $47 and $52 million. We can prove $47 million with documentation. The rest is educated guessing based on patterns and gaps in the paper trail. Hannah felt dizzy. He told me we had maybe 5 million in assets. He said we needed to be careful about money, that the real estate market was unpredictable. Jennifer, the investigator, leaned forward. Mrs. Cross, your husband has been gaslighting you about finances for your entire marriage. While telling you to be frugal, he was buying properties in Costa Rica. While saying you couldn't afford a better art studio, he was investing hundreds of thousands in cryptocurrency. The prenup was never about protecting a modest estate. It was about ensuring that when he eventually tired of you, you'd walk away with almost nothing while he kept everything. And it almost worked, Vivian added quietly. If you hadn't called me, if you'd shown up to that court date alone like he expected, you would have gotten maybe $200,000 and an agreement not to pursue further claims. He would have walked away with $47 million, and you would have had no idea it existed. Hannah stared at the flowchart, at the visual representation of her husband's decade-long deception. What about Nina's testimony? Will that hold up? David, the litigation specialist, nodded. Absolutely. We've reviewed the text messages she provided, and they're damning. But more importantly, she's credible. She's not asking for money. She's not trying to get revenge. She's genuinely frightened of Ethan and wants to protect herself legally. That plays well to juries and judges. When will she testify? At the hearing in 12 days, Vivian said. But we're not waiting until then to use what she's given us. I'm filing a motion this afternoon to freeze all of Ethan's accounts, including the offshore ones. The judge was already predisposed to believe he was hiding assets. Nina's texts confirm it. By the end of today, he won't be able to move money anywhere without court approval. Hannah felt a savage satisfaction at that. He's going to lose his mind. Let him, Vivian said coldly. Every time he loses control, every time he lashes out, he creates more evidence of his character. Which brings me to something important. She pulled out a different folder, this one thinner. We need to talk about your father. The shift in topic was so abrupt that Hannah blinked. What about him? He called my office yesterday, 3 times. He wants to meet with you. I blocked his number after he called me yesterday. He tried to convince me that you had some secret agenda and that I shouldn't trust you. Vivian's expression didn't change, but something cold moved behind her eyes. That sounds like Graham. What did you tell him? That I knew what he'd done, that I wasn't interested in his version of events anymore, and then I hung up on him. Hannah paused. Should I be worried? About him interfering? Marcus cleared his throat. Mrs. Cross, there's something you should know about your father's finances. We did a preliminary background check, standard procedure for divorce cases, making sure there are no undisclosed family assets or conflicts. And we found something interesting. He pulled up a document on his laptop and turned the screen toward Hannah. Your father loaned Ethan money, a lot of money. $2 million 3 years ago, secured by a lien on the penthouse. Hannah's blood went cold. What? It's buried in paperwork, and the lien was filed quietly, but it's there, which means when the penthouse gets awarded to you in the divorce settlement, your father has a legal claim to it as collateral for the loan. That's not possible. Ethan never told me about any loan. And the penthouse, we bought it together, with money from his business. He can't just put a lien on it without my signature. Vivian's voice was gentle but firm. Hannah, did you sign any documents around 3 years ago that Ethan said were related to refinancing or property taxes? Hannah thought back, trying to remember. 3 years ago would have been early 2023. She'd been preparing for a gallery show, stressed and distracted, barely paying attention to the household finances that Ethan insisted on managing. There were some papers, she said slowly. He said they were routine property documents, that they needed my signature for insurance purposes. I signed them. Did you read them first? No, he said it was just formality, that everything was fine, and I trusted him. Hannah's voice cracked. I trusted both of them. Jennifer spoke up. The loan was structured as a private agreement between Graham Locke and Ethan Cross. The terms are favorable to your father. Low interest, flexible repayment, and in the event of default, he gets the property. Which means if Ethan defaults on the loan, or if the property gets awarded to you in divorce proceedings, your father could argue that he's entitled to seize it. Can he do that, legally? Vivian shook her head. It's complicated. The lien would normally be valid, except for one problem. If you can prove you didn't knowingly consent to using the marital home as collateral, And if we can demonstrate that your signature was obtained through deception, then the lien itself is fraudulent, which means it's void. But proving that will require you to testify that Ethan lied to you about what you were signing, which you'll already be doing regarding the prenup, so it's the same testimony, just expanded. Vivian closed the folder. What concerns me more is that Graham and Ethan have been working together. Your father helped Ethan secure assets against you. That's not a coincidence or a business deal. That's collusion. Hannah felt sick. Why would he do that? I'm his daughter. Because Graham Locke has always valued money and control over everything else, including his children. Vivian's voice was carefully neutral, but Hannah could hear the old anger beneath it. When you reconnected with him 15 years ago, after we separated, I wanted to warn you. I wanted to tell you what kind of man he really was. But you were so angry at me, and anything I said would have just pushed you further into his arms. So I stayed silent and hoped you'd figure it out before he did too much damage. He introduced me to Ethan, Hannah said suddenly. I never made the connection before, but Dad introduced us. At a charity event Graham was hosting. He literally walked Ethan over to me and said I should get to know him because he was going places. The room went very quiet. Marcus broke the silence. How long after meeting Ethan did you start dating him? That night. He asked for my number, called me the next day, and we went out that weekend. Hannah's mind was racing now, putting pieces together that she'd never examined before. And 6 months later, we were engaged. Ethan pushed for a quick wedding, said he didn't want to wait when he knew I was the one. And the prenup, Dad was there when I signed it. He told me it was smart to have legal protections, that it showed Ethan was being responsible. Vivian stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. When she spoke, her voice was tight with controlled fury. Graham set you up. He introduced you to Ethan knowing exactly what kind of man he was. He encouraged the relationship, pushed for the marriage, and facilitated a prenup that would leave you with nothing if the marriage failed. And then he made a private loan to Ethan secured by your home, ensuring that even if you somehow won the divorce, you'd lose the property to Graham himself. But why? What does he get out of this? Control, Vivian said simply. Graham has always been obsessed with control. When we divorced, and I got primary custody of you, he lost control over me. But he knew that if he could isolate you from me, if he could position himself as your only ally and then put you in a situation where you needed him, he'd have the control back. Not over me, over you. Hannah stood up so fast her chair rolled backward. That's insane. He's my father. Yes, and he's also a narcissist who sees his children as extensions of himself rather than as independent human beings. Vivian turned to face her. Hannah, I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because you need to understand who we're dealing with. Ethan is dangerous because he's cruel and entitled, but Graham is dangerous because he's patient and strategic. He's been playing a long game, and we need to be ready for his next move. David pulled out another document. We should also discuss what happens if Graham tries to enforce the lien. There's a hearing scheduled in 12 days for the divorce case. If Graham files a claim before then, or if he tries to execute the lien after the penthouse is awarded to you, we need a response ready. What kind of response? Hannah asked. We challenge the validity of your signature on the loan documents. We argue that you were deceived about what you were signing, which means you didn't give informed consent. We also argue that using a marital asset as collateral without both spouses knowing consent violates New York property law. David looked at Vivian. It'll be messy, and there's no guarantee we win. But we can fight it. Hannah sank back into her chair. So even if I win against Ethan, I might lose the penthouse to my father. Possibly, Vivian said. But we're not going to let that happen without one hell of a fight. And there's another option. Which is? We go on offense. We file fraud charges against both Ethan and Graham for conspiracy to defraud you of marital assets. If we can prove they worked together to trap you in a marriage designed to leave you impoverished while they both profited, that's criminal fraud. They'd both face jail time. Marcus looked up sharply. You think the DA would prosecute? If we hand them enough evidence? Absolutely. White-collar fraud, especially involving this much money? They'd love the case. Vivian sat back down across from Hannah. But I need to know you're ready for that. Going after Graham means burning that bridge permanently. It means your father could go to prison. Are you prepared for that? Hannah thought about the 15 years she'd lost with her mother because of Graham's lies. She thought about Ethan's sneering face in the courtroom, his certainty that she was too weak to fight back. She thought about the prenup she'd signed without understanding it, the loan document she'd been tricked into approving, the systematic dismantling of her autonomy that both men had orchestrated. "Yes," she said clearly. "I'm ready." Vivian's expression softened with something that looked like pride. "Then we proceed with everything. Freeze Ethan's assets, challenge the prenup, call Nina as a witness, and start building the fraud case against both of them. No mercy, no second chances." The meeting continued for another 2 hours, with Vivian's team walking Hannah through every piece of evidence, every legal strategy, every possible outcome. By the time they finished, Hannah felt like she'd just completed a crash course in how to dismantle someone's entire life using the legal system. It should have felt wrong, vindictive, cruel. Instead, it felt like justice. As the team filed out to begin their respective tasks, Vivian asked Hannah to stay behind. They sat alone in the conference room, mother and daughter separated by years of silence and a table covered in documents that proved how badly Hannah had been betrayed. "Are you okay?" Vivian asked softly. Hannah considered the question. Was she okay? Her marriage was over, her father had conspired against her, and she was about to enter a legal battle that would probably destroy what was left of her family. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm better than I was a week ago. At least now I know the truth. The truth doesn't always make things easier." "No, but it makes things clearer." Hannah looked at her mother. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "When you and Dad divorced, did you know he was going to go after me? Try to turn me against you?" Vivian's jaw tightened. "I suspected. Graham doesn't lose gracefully, and losing custody was a massive blow to his ego. I tried to protect you from it. I had my attorney put restrictions in the custody agreement about not disparaging the other parent in front of you. But Graham is clever. He never said anything directly cruel about me to you. He just implied, suggested, planted seeds of doubt, and let them grow. And I fell for it. You were 22 and dealing with your parents' divorce. He gave you a simple narrative that I was a cold, career-obsessed woman who didn't care about her family. It made sense of why the marriage fell apart in a way that didn't require you to see your father as the bad guy. Of course you believed him." Vivian reached across the table and took Hannah's hand. "I should have fought harder. I should have made you listen. I have spent 15 years regretting that I let you go without more of a fight. I wouldn't have listened. I was too angry, too hurt, too convinced that you'd chosen work over family. I did choose work too often. That part was true. I missed recitals and parent-teacher conferences and soccer games because I was in court or preparing for trials. I thought I was building a legacy, securing our financial future, proving that women could be just as successful as men in law. But what I was actually doing was missing my daughter's childhood." Hannah felt tears building. "I needed you, though. Even when I was angry at you, even when I wouldn't take your calls, I needed you. And when I met Ethan, when things started getting bad, there were so many times I wanted to call you and ask for help, but I'd burned that bridge so completely that I didn't think I could cross back." "You can always cross back to me," Vivian said fiercely. "Always. No matter how much time passes, no matter what's happened, you are my daughter, and I will always be here for you. Always." They sat together in silence for a moment, hands linked across the table, beginning to rebuild what had been broken so long ago. Finally, Hannah said, "What happens now, with the case, I mean? Now we wait for Ethan to make a mistake, and we prepare for your father to make his move." Vivian squeezed her hand once before letting go. "But in the meantime, you need to live your life. Don't let this consume you. Go to your studio, work on your art, see friends. Don't let these men take up any more of your time and energy than absolutely necessary." That's easy to say and hard to do. I know, but it's important. Because when this is over, when Ethan is gone and Graham is dealt with, you're going to need to know who you are outside of this fight. You're going to need to remember that you're Hannah, the artist, the creative, the woman with her whole life ahead of her, not just Hannah, the wronged wife. Hannah nodded slowly. "I have a gallery show coming up in 6 weeks. I wasn't sure if I should still do it. with everything else happening. Do it, Vivian said immediately. Absolutely do it. Show the world that you're not just surviving, you're thriving. That's the best revenge of all. They left the conference room together, and Vivian walked Hannah to the elevator. As the doors opened, she pulled her daughter into a hug that felt like coming home after years of being lost. I love you, Vivian whispered. I'm so proud of you for fighting back. I love you too, Mom. The elevator descended and Hannah watched the floor numbers count down, thinking about everything that had happened in the last 72 hours. She'd gone from a woman with nothing, no money, no lawyer, no hope, to a woman with a legal team, a strategy, and her mother at her side. Outside, the city rushed past, indifferent to personal dramas and legal battles. Hannah walked 3 blocks before she realized she was heading toward her art studio instead of the penthouse. It was a small space in Chelsea, barely affordable even before Ethan had frozen her accounts. But it was hers, a place he'd never been interested in, never tried to control. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar smell of paint and turpentine and canvas. Her current project was still on the easel, an abstract piece in blues and grays that she'd started 3 months ago and abandoned when the divorce proceedings began. Hannah picked up a brush, mixed some paint, and began working. For the first time in months, she felt like herself. She worked for hours, losing herself in color and form and the simple act of creation. The painting evolved under her hands, the blues deepening to near black, the grays brightening to silver, the whole composition shifting from melancholy to something fiercer, more defiant. When her phone rang, she almost didn't answer, but it was Nina's number. Hello? Hannah? Nina's voice was shaking. I'm sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to call. Ethan knows. About the text messages, about me talking to your mother. He knows. Hannah set down her brush carefully. How did he find out? I don't know, but he just showed up at my apartment. He's outside right now, banging on the door, screaming that I betrayed him. I called the police, but I'm scared. I'm really scared. Stay inside. Keep the door locked. The police are coming. He's saying he's going to ruin me. He's saying I'll never work in this city again, that he'll make sure everyone knows what I did. Nina was crying now. Hannah, I know I don't deserve your help. I know what I did was wrong, but please, give me your address. Nina rattled it off, and Hannah was already grabbing her coat. I'm calling my mother right now. She'll have someone there in 10 minutes. Do not open that door for anyone except the police. Do you understand? Yes. Thank you. God, thank you. Hannah called Vivian while running down the stairs to the street. Mom, Ethan's at Nina's apartment. She called the police, but he's threatening her. I'm already on it, Vivian said crisply. I heard the call. She conferenced me in after she called you. I've got a security team 2 blocks away. They'll be there before the police. How did you? I put protection on Nina the moment she agreed to testify. I knew Ethan would go after her eventually. The sound of Vivian typing rapidly. The security team will document everything. Every threat, every word, everything. This is going to be Exhibit A in the harassment case. Hannah hailed a cab and gave the driver Nina's address in Brooklyn. I'm going over there. Hannah, no, let the professionals handle it. She's scared and alone, and this is happening because she helped me. I'm going. Vivian sighed. Fine, but you stay in the cab until I confirm Ethan is gone. Promise me. I promise. The drive to Brooklyn felt interminable, traffic snarling at every intersection, the cab driver muttering about tourists and construction. Hannah watched the building slide past and thought about Ethan's face when the judge froze his assets, when he realized he was losing control. Men like him didn't handle loss well. By the time she arrived at Nina's building, 3 police cars were parked outside, lights flashing. A small crowd had gathered, and Hannah could see officers talking to someone near the building entrance. Ethan, his face red with rage, his expensive suit disheveled. She stayed in the cab like she'd promised, watching through the window as police officers took statements, and Ethan gestured wildly, clearly trying to convince them that he was the victim somehow. Her phone buzzed. Vivian. Security team is with Nina. She's safe. They recorded Ethan's threats, enough for a restraining order and possible stalking charges. Police are issuing a citation now. Hannah texted back. I'm outside in a cab. Should I go up to her Wait 5 more minutes. Let the police clear Ethan out first. She watched as officers escorted Ethan away from the building, one of them holding his arm firmly while Ethan continued protesting. He looked diminished somehow, his usual confidence replaced with something that looked almost like panic. When the police cars finally pulled away, Hannah paid the driver and went inside. Nina's apartment was on the 4th floor, and when Hannah knocked, the door opened immediately to reveal 2 large men in suits who looked like they could bench press a car. "Mrs. Cross," one of them said, "Miss Hale is expecting you." Nina was curled up on her couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the warm apartment. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked younger than Hannah had expected, maybe 26, maybe 27. "I'm so sorry," Nina said immediately. "I'm sorry for everything, for sleeping with your husband, for being part of this, for—" "Stop," Hannah said gently. She sat down next to Nina, keeping a respectful distance. "You didn't know the whole truth. Ethan lied to both of us. That doesn't excuse what you did, but I understand how he operates. He's very good at making people believe what he wants them to believe. He told me you were cold, that you'd stopped loving him years ago, that the divorce was a formality." Nina wiped her eyes. "But even if that were true, I shouldn't have. I knew he was still married. I knew it was wrong." "Yes," Hannah agreed quietly. "You did, but you're trying to make it right now, and that matters." They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Nina said, "What he said outside about ruining me, can he actually do that?" "No, not anymore." Hannah pulled out her phone and showed Nina the text from Vivian. "My mother's team recorded his threats. That's illegal harassment. Combined with the restraining order I have against him and the one you can now get, he won't be able to come near you again." "But he knows so many people. He could blacklist me. From what? You're not in his industry, and even if he tried, once the divorce case goes public, once people see what kind of man he really is, his reputation will be worthless. No one's going to take his side when they know he hid $47 million and tried to leave his wife destitute." Nina looked at her with something like awe. "You're really going to destroy him, aren't you?" "I'm really going to make him face consequences for his actions," Hannah corrected. "There's a difference. I'm not doing this out of revenge. I'm doing this because he needs to understand that he can't treat people like property and get away with it." One of the security guards cleared his throat. "Mrs. Cross, Mrs. Locke asked me to tell you that she's arranged for Mrs. Hale to stay in a secure location until after the hearing. Hotel suite, all expenses paid, security detail included." Nina's eyes widened. "I can't afford—" "You're not paying for it," Hannah said. "My mother is. Consider it witness protection." "Why would she do that for me?" "Because protecting you protects the case, and because despite everything, you're trying to do the right thing now." Hannah stood. "Pack a bag. Enough for 2 weeks. The security team will take you somewhere safe, and you won't have to worry about Ethan finding you." As Nina went to pack, Hannah stepped into the hallway and called her mother. "Is she okay?" Vivian asked immediately. "Shaken but unharmed. Thank you for the security team. I should have had them there sooner. I underestimated how quickly Ethan would escalate." "We all did." Hannah leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "Mom, what if he doesn't stop? What if the restraining order doesn't matter to him?" "Then he gets arrested and charged. And honestly, Hannah, that might be the best thing that could happen. Nothing undermines a divorce case quite like the defendant being in jail for violating protective orders." Hannah managed a weak laugh. "You're terrifying when you're in lawyer mode." "Good. Ethan should be terrified." They hung up, and Hannah waited while Nina packed. 20 minutes later, they all left together, Nina with her rolling suitcase flanked by security guards who looked like they could stop a small army. On the street, Nina turned to Hannah one more time. "Thank you. I know I don't deserve your help, but thank you." "Just tell the truth at the hearing," Hannah said. "That's all I need from you." She watched as Nina was loaded into a black SUV with tinted windows and driven away. Then Hannah caught her own cab back to Manhattan, back to the penthouse that was legally hers for now, but which she'd have to fight to keep. When she walked through the door, she found a manila envelope that had been slipped underneath. No return address, no markings, just her name written in handwriting she recognized immediately. Her father's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief message. "We need to talk about the penthouse. Come alone. Tomorrow, noon, the usual place." Dad. Hannah stared at the note, her heart racing. The usual place. He meant the restaurant where they used to have lunch when she still spoke to him, an upscale steakhouse in Midtown that Graham loved because the waiters knew him by name. She should tell Vivian. She should forward this to her mother's team and let them handle it. Instead, she found herself wondering what Graham wanted to say, what move he was planning to make. Maybe it was time to find out. Hannah didn't tell Vivian about the note. She knew she should have. Knew that meeting Graham alone was probably exactly what he wanted. Exactly the kind of tactical error her mother would warn against. But something stubborn and angry inside her insisted that this was a conversation she needed to have without lawyers and strategy sessions and recorded evidence. She arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, deliberately choosing a table near the windows where other diners could see them clearly. Whatever Graham had planned, he'd have to do it in public. The maitre d' recognized her immediately. "Ms. Locke, it's been too long. Your father said you'd be joining him today." "He's not here yet?" "Not yet, but his usual table is ready whenever you are." Hannah shook her head. "I'll take this one instead, by the window." The maitre d' looked momentarily confused. Graham's usual table was in the back corner, private and quiet, but recovered quickly. "Of course. Can I get you something while you wait?" "Water is fine." She sat facing the entrance, watching businessmen and society women filter through for their lunch appointments, everyone dressed like success and performing confidence. This had been her father's world once, the world he tried to pull her into after the divorce from Vivian. Expensive meals and expensive people, all of them measuring worth in terms of money and connections. Graham arrived exactly at noon, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He was 63 but looked younger, his silver hair perfectly styled, his face showing just enough lines to suggest wisdom rather than age. He'd always been handsome in that distinguished way that opened doors and closed skepticism. He spotted Hannah immediately, and his expression flickered. Surprise at the table location, quickly masked by a warm smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hannah, sweetheart." He leaned down to kiss her cheek, and she let him, though her skin crawled at the contact. "I'm glad you came. You said we needed to talk about the penthouse." Graham settled into the seat across from her, ordering a scotch from the passing waiter with practiced ease. "Always so direct. You get that from your mother." "What do you want, Dad?" He leaned back, studying her with the kind of assessment she'd seen him use on business deals and negotiations. "I want to help you. Despite what Vivian may have told you, despite whatever she's convinced you to believe about me, I'm still your father. I still care about your well-being." "The loan," Hannah said flatly. "The $2 million you loaned Ethan with a lien on my home. Tell me about that." Graham's smile didn't waver. "That was a business transaction between two men. It had nothing to do with you. The house is in both our names. Any lien on it affects me." "Technically, yes, but Ethan assured me he'd discussed it with you, that you'd approved the arrangement." He lied. "Well," Graham spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "That's unfortunate, but it doesn't change the validity of the loan. I provided capital in good faith, secured by appropriate collateral. If Ethan misrepresented the situation to you, that's between you and him." Hannah felt her jaw tighten. You knew he was lying to me about it, just like you knew what kind of man he was when you introduced us 13 years ago." The waiter returned with Graham's scotch, and he took a long sip before responding. "I introduced you to a successful young businessman who I thought might be a good match for my daughter. How was I supposed to know the marriage wouldn't work out?" "Because you helped engineer its failure." Hannah kept her voice low, conscious of the other diners, but let the anger bleed through. "You facilitated a prenup designed to leave me with nothing. You made a loan specifically structured to give you control over my home. You and Ethan worked together to trap me." Graham's expression finally hardened. "Be very careful with accusations like that, Hannah. Slander is a serious offense. So is fraud, so is conspiracy. My mother's team has documented everything." "Vivian," Graham said the name like a curse. "Of course. She's always been good at turning you against the people who actually care about you. Tell me, has she explained why our marriage really fell apart? Has she told you about the affairs, the neglect, the way she prioritized her career over her family?" "She told me she made mistakes. She also told me that you're a narcissist who sees people as objects to be controlled. Hannah met his eyes steadily. And after spending 15 years believing your version of events, I'm starting to think she was right. Graham's scotch glass hit the table harder than necessary. I gave you everything. When your mother was too busy building her precious legal empire to attend your school plays or your art shows, who was there? When you needed someone to believe in your talent, who supported you? I did. I was the one who showed up. You showed up because it gave you leverage against Mom. You showed up because every moment you spent with me was a moment you could use to poison me against her. You showed up because I was useful to you. That's ridiculous. Is it? Because here's what I've figured out in the last few days. Hannah leaned forward. You introduced me to Ethan because you knew he was like you, charming, successful, and fundamentally incapable of seeing women as anything other than accessories. You pushed for a quick wedding because you wanted me locked in before I had time to think critically about what I was doing. You endorsed the prenup because you knew it would leave me financially dependent on either Ethan or you. And when that wasn't enough control, you made the loan with the lien so that even if I left Ethan, I'd still need you. Graham stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. You've been spending too much time with Vivian. You're starting to sound like her. All this psychology and analysis instead of just accepting reality. What reality is that? That you're not equipped to handle life on your own. You never have been. His voice was matter-of-fact, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. You're talented, Hannah. I've never denied that. But talent isn't enough. You need guidance, protection, someone to handle the practical aspects of life while you create your art. That's what I provided. That's what Ethan provided. And without us, you'll struggle. The casual cruelty of it took Hannah's breath away. This was what Graham actually believed, that she was fundamentally incapable, that her autonomy was an illusion, that she needed men to manage her life. I don't need either of you, she said quietly. I never did. I just didn't realize it until now. Graham finished his scotch and signaled for another. Hannah, I didn't ask you here to argue. I asked you here to make you an offer. The penthouse. I'm willing to forgive the loan and release the lien. You can keep the property free and clear, no strings attached. Hannah's instincts screamed warning. In exchange for what? In exchange for you dropping the divorce case against Ethan. Work out a settlement privately, something reasonable that doesn't involve Vivian's scorched earth approach. Take your 2 or 3 million, keep the penthouse, and move on with your life. Why would you want me to do that? Graham's second scotch arrived, and he took a careful sip before answering. Because this circus your mother is creating, freezing assets, calling witnesses, threatening criminal charges, it's bad for business. Ethan and I have mutual associates, mutual investments. When he goes down, I get dragged into it. I'd prefer to avoid that messiness. So this is about protecting yourself. This is about protecting both of us. You get the penthouse and enough money to be comfortable. I avoid legal complications. Ethan loses some assets but maintains his reputation. Everyone walks away intact. Hannah studied her father's face, looking for some trace of genuine paternal concern and finding only calculation. And if I say no, then I enforce the lien. The moment the court awards you the penthouse and divorce proceedings, I file a claim for the full value of the loan plus accrued interest. That's roughly $2.4 million, Hannah. If you can't pay, and you can't, because Ethan froze your accounts, and your mother's legal fees are probably already astronomical, then I seize the property. You end up with nothing, and I end up as the villain who took his daughters home. Nobody wins. Except you get a penthouse worth at least $8 million for a $2 million loan. Sounds like you win just fine. Graham smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd just been caught but didn't particularly care. Business is business, sweetheart. I taught you that. Hannah felt something shift inside her, something cold and clear clicking into place like a lock turning. You did teach me that. You also taught me that you should always read contracts carefully before signing them, always verify claims before accepting them as truth, and always get documentation. Graham's smile faltered slightly. What are you talking about? Hannah pulled out her phone and set it on the table between them. On the screen was a recording app, the timer showing that it had been running for the last 7 minutes. Graham's face went white. You recorded this conversation? New York is a one-party consent state. I'm allowed to record conversations I'm participating in. Hannah picked up the phone, stopped the recording, and immediately forwarded it to Vivian. You just admitted on tape that you and Ethan have mutual investments, that you're trying to protect him from legal consequences, and that you're willing to seize my home unless I drop the fraud case against him. That's not just evidence of collusion, Dad. That's conspiracy to obstruct justice. Graham stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Several nearby diners glanced over. You have no idea what you're doing. Vivian has poisoned you against your own father. My father died the day he decided his daughter was a chess piece instead of a person. Hannah stood as well, gathering her things. The lien on the penthouse is fraudulent because I never knowingly consented to it. My mother's team can prove that. Your loan to Ethan was part of a conspiracy to trap me in a financially abusive marriage. We can prove that too. And now I have you on tape admitting that you're trying to protect Ethan from consequences specifically because it benefits you financially. No judge will. Judge Moreno already hates Ethan. She already knows he's been hiding assets and lying under oath. When she hears that you helped him do it, that you've been working together to defraud me, she's going to throw the book at both of you. Hannah's voice was steady now, clear and strong. You taught me to be strategic, Dad. You taught me to plan ahead and protect my interests. You just never expected me to use those lessons against you. She turned to leave, but Graham grabbed her arm. His grip was tight enough to hurt. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You have no idea how much damage I can do to you if you pursue this. I have connections, resources, information about you and your mother that could— Let go of my arm. Hannah's voice cut through the restaurant noise like a blade. Now! The maitre d' was already moving toward them, concern evident on his face. Graham released her arm but didn't step back. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. Hannah rubbed her arm where his fingers had gripped too tight. Goodbye, Dad. She walked out of the restaurant with her head high, ignoring the stares from other diners, ignoring Graham's voice calling after her. On the sidewalk, she finally let herself shake, the adrenaline crash hitting like a wave. Her phone rang. Vivian. I got the recording, her mother said without preamble. Hannah, that was incredibly dangerous and incredibly brilliant. Are you okay? He grabbed my arm, not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to make a point. Did anyone see it? The maitre d' was already heading over, probably other diners too. Good. We'll get statements. Vivian's voice was pure steel now. Hannah, I need you to go straight to the nearest police station and file a report. Graham violated your personal space in a threatening manner. That's assault, even if it was brief. Mom, I don't want to. This isn't about what you want. This is about building an unassailable case. Graham just made a massive mistake and we need to document it immediately. File the report, get photographs of your arm if there are any marks, and then come to my office. We have work to do. Hannah followed instructions, finding a police station 6 blocks away and filing a report that felt both surreal and grimly necessary. The officer who took her statement was professional and kind, noting the location, time, and witnesses. He photographed her arm. There were faint red marks where Graham's fingers had pressed, and gave her a case number. By the time she reached Vivian's office, the entire team was assembled again. Marcus had the recording queued up on his laptop. David was already drafting motions, and Jennifer had somehow obtained security footage from the restaurant showing Graham grabbing Hannah's arm. How did you get that so fast? Hannah asked. Jennifer smiled grimly. The restaurant owner is a woman who's been through her own divorce from an abusive husband. When I explained what we needed and why, she was very cooperative. Vivian gestured to a chair. Sit. We need to talk about what happens next. Hannah sat, still processing the last hour. He really thought I'd just give up. He actually believed I'd drop the case to save him from embarrassment. Men like Graham always think they can negotiate their way out of consequences, Vivian said. They're so accustomed to using charm and intimidation and money to solve problems that they can't conceive of someone who won't be moved by those things. The recording is damning, Marcus said, replaying portions of it. He admits to mutual investments with Ethan, admits to structuring the loan as leverage against you, and explicitly threatens to seize your property unless you drop fraud charges. That's textbook conspiracy to obstruct justice. David looked up from his laptop. I'm filing 3 motions with the court this afternoon. First, a motion to invalidate the lien on the penthouse based on fraudulent procurement. Second, a motion to add Graham Locke as a co-defendant in the fraud case. And third, a motion for an emergency protective order based on today's assault. Will Judge Moreno grant them? Hannah asked. The protective order is almost certain. We have the recording, the police report, and video evidence. The motion to invalidate the lien is strong, given your testimony that you were deceived about what you were signing. The motion to add Graham as a co-defendant is more complicated, but this recording makes it viable. David smiled without humor. By the end of the week, your father is going to realize he's in serious legal trouble. Vivian sat down next to Hannah. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Are you okay with what's about to happen? Once we file these motions, once Graham is named as a defendant, there's no going back. He will face criminal charges. He could go to prison, and he will never forgive you for it. Hannah thought about the 15 years she'd spent believing Graham's lies. She thought about the way he'd systematically isolated her from Vivian. She thought about meeting Ethan at that charity event, about the prenup she'd been rushed into signing, about the loan documents she'd signed thinking they were routine paperwork. She thought about Graham's hand on her arm, his casual confidence that she'd comply with his demands, his fundamental belief that she was too weak to fight back. I'm okay with it, she said clearly. File the motions. The team moved into action with the precision of a military operation. Calls were made, documents were prepared, and within 2 hours, Hannah watched as David electronically filed all 3 motions with Manhattan Civil Court. Judge Moreno will see these first thing tomorrow morning, David said. I'd expect a hearing within 72 hours. Vivian's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen before showing it to Hannah. It was a text from an unknown number. Your daughter just made the biggest mistake of her life. You should have taught her to respect her father. Graham, Vivian said unnecessarily. He's panicking. Good, Hannah said. Jennifer looked up from her own laptop. I've been doing deeper background on Graham's finances. There are some interesting connections I want to explore further. Did you know he's listed as a silent partner in 3 of Ethan's shell companies? Hannah felt her stomach drop. No, how deep does this go? I'm not sure yet, but it's looking less like Graham just made one loan to Ethan and more like they've been business partners for years, which would explain why Graham was so invested in your marriage working out. His financial interests were directly tied to Ethan's success. Jesus. Hannah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. He didn't just introduce me to Ethan. He was in business with him. The whole thing, the entire marriage, was about money. Vivian joined her at the window. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know this isn't easy to hear. It's not easy, but it's also clarifying. Hannah turned to face her mother. I spent so many years thinking I was stupid for not seeing through Ethan, for not recognizing the red flags. But the truth is that the deck was stacked against me from the beginning. Graham and Ethan were working together. I never had a chance. You have a chance now, Vivian said fiercely. And we're going to make sure you win. The rest of the afternoon was consumed with preparation for the upcoming hearing. Hannah answered questions, reviewed documents, and tried to absorb the crash course in legal strategy that Vivian's team provided. By the time she left the office at 7 p.m., her head was spinning with information about depositions and discovery and legal precedents. The driver Vivian had arranged took her back to the penthouse, and Hannah spent the elevator ride up, wondering if she'd ever feel safe in this apartment again. It was beautiful, expensive, everything she'd once thought she wanted. But it was also tainted by Ethan's presence, by the knowledge that her father had his name attached to it through that fraudulent lien. Inside, she poured herself a glass of wine and settled onto the couch with her phone. There were 17 new text messages, most of them from numbers she didn't recognize. She opened the first one. You gold-digging bitch. Ethan told me what you're trying to do. You don't deserve a penny. The second message was similar, and the third and the fourth. Someone, almost certainly Ethan, had given out her number to his friends and associates, encouraging them to harass her. Hannah blocked each number systematically, refusing to let the messages get under her skin. This was desperation, not strength. Ethan was losing, and he knew it. Her actual phone, her personal cell that only close friends had, rang with a call from Maya Rodriguez, her best friend from art school. "Hannah! Oh my God, I've been trying to reach you for days. Are you okay? I heard about the divorce." Hannah felt something in her chest loosen at the sound of a friendly voice. "I'm okay. It's been intense, but I'm managing." Intense? Hannah, the rumors are insane. People are saying Ethan hid millions of dollars, that there's going to be a huge trial, that your mom is representing you. Is any of that true? All of it, actually. Maya let out a low whistle. Damn. I always knew he was an asshole, but I didn't realize he was a criminal asshole. How are you holding up? Better than I expected, worse than I'd like. Hannah took a sip of wine. My mom has been amazing, though. We're actually talking again after 15 years. That's incredible. I remember how sad you used to get when you'd mention her. I'm glad you reconnected. Maya paused. Listen, I know you're dealing with a lot right now, but I wanted to remind you about your gallery show. It's in 6 weeks, and Luis has been asking if you're still planning to participate. Hannah had almost forgotten about the show. Luis Chen ran a prestigious gallery in Soho, and he'd offered her a spot in a group exhibition months ago before the divorce proceedings began. I don't know if I'll have time to prepare new work. You don't need new work. The pieces you've already created are incredible. Hannah, don't let Ethan take this from you too. Don't let him steal your art along with everything else. You're right. Hannah looked over at the canvas bags in the corner where she'd stored her recent paintings. I'll do it. Tell Luis I'm in. They talked for another 30 minutes, catching up on gallery gossip and mutual friends, and when they finally hung up, Hannah felt more grounded than she had all day. This was real life, friends and art and possibility. The legal battle was necessary, but it wasn't everything. She went to her studio space, the second bedroom that Ethan had reluctantly agreed she could use for her work, and pulled out the canvases she'd completed over the last year. 8 paintings, all variations on themes of isolation and constraint, all done in the blues and grays and silvers that had become her signature palette. Looking at them now, she could see her own story reflected back at her. The woman trapped behind glass, the figure reaching toward light that never quite arrived, the abstract forms that suggested cages even as they claimed to represent freedom. She'd been painting her own imprisonment for years without fully realizing it. Hannah pulled out a fresh canvas and began sketching a new composition, something different, something that reflected not capture, but escape. She worked late into the night, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of creation, and when she finally went to bed at 2 a.m., she fell asleep with paint still on her hands. The next morning, she woke to her phone ringing insistently. Vivian. Judge Moreno granted all 3 motions, her mother said without preamble. The protective order against Graham is in effect immediately. The lien is suspended pending full hearing, and Graham has been added as a co-defendant in the fraud case. We have a hearing scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Hannah sat up in bed, her heart racing. Tomorrow? That's fast. Judge Moreno is expediting everything. She's seen the recording, seen the evidence, and she's not interested in delays. This is happening, Hannah. Are you ready? Hannah thought about her father's face across the restaurant table, about his casual cruelty, about the 15 years of manipulation and lies. I'm ready, she said. Good. Come to my office at 9 a.m. We need to prepare your testimony. The hearing the next day was different from the first court appearance. This time, the gallery was full, reporters, legal observers, people who'd heard about the case and wanted to watch it unfold. Hannah sat at the plaintiff's table beside Vivian, feeling the weight of scrutiny from all sides. Ethan was there, of course, looking furious and desperate. Malcolm Drake sat beside him, though he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. And at a separate table, newly designated as a co-defendant, sat Graham Locke with his own attorney, an older man named Richard Pierce who had a reputation for defending white-collar criminals. Judge Moreno entered and the room fell silent. This court is now in session. We're here to address multiple motions filed by Vivian Locke on behalf of Hannah Cross, including allegations of fraud, conspiracy, and assault. Mr. Pierce, Mr. Drake, I've reviewed the evidence submitted by Mrs. Locke. Do your clients have any preliminary statements? Richard Pierce stood. Your Honor, my client Graham Locke maintains his innocence of all charges. The loan to Ethan Cross was a legitimate business transaction. Any claims of conspiracy are speculative and unsupported by concrete evidence. Judge Moreno looked at him over her glasses. Mr. Pierce, have you listened to the recording Ms. Locke submitted? The one where your client explicitly admits to structuring a loan as leverage against his daughter and threatens to seize her property unless she drops fraud charges? Your Honor, that conversation was taken out of context. I've listened to the full recording, Mr. Pierce. There is no context in which those statements are acceptable. Judge Moreno shifted her attention to Malcolm Drake. Mr. Drake, what about your client? Malcolm stood slowly. Your Honor, I'd like to request permission to withdraw from this case. Recent evidence has revealed information about my client's activities that I was not previously aware of. Continuing to represent Mr. Cross would put me in an ethically compromised position. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Ethan grabbed Malcolm's arm, hissing something urgent, but Malcolm pulled away firmly. Judge Moreno nodded. Motion to withdraw is granted. Mr. Cross, you'll need to retain new counsel. We'll reconvene in 5 days to give you time to do so. In the meantime, all previous orders remain in effect. Assets frozen, protective orders active. Mr. Locke is prohibited from contact with Miss Cross except through legal channels. She banged the gavel, and it was over. As people filed out, Hannah watched her father's face. He looked older suddenly, diminished, the confidence that had always defined him replaced by something that looked like fear. He caught her eye across the courtroom, and for just a moment she saw something like recognition there, an acknowledgement that she'd beaten him at his own game. Then he turned and walked out, his attorney following close behind. Ethan tried to approach Hannah, but court officers intervened immediately, reminding him of the restraining order. He stood there, helpless and furious, while Hannah walked past him without a glance. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions that Vivian deflected with practiced ease. They made it to the car, and only when they were safely inside with the doors locked did Vivian allow herself to smile. You did it, she said. You actually did it. We did it, Hannah corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. Vivian took her daughter's hand. 5 more days until the final hearing. Are you ready to finish this? Hannah looked out at the city rushing past, at the life she was building from the ashes of everything she'd lost. I'm ready, she said. Let's end this. The 5 days before the final hearing felt both endless and far too short. Hannah spent her mornings at Vivian's office, reviewing testimony and evidence, and her afternoons in her studio, painting with a ferocity she hadn't felt in years. The new canvas she'd started had evolved into something powerful, a figure breaking through barriers of silver and blue, emerging into light that was finally, genuinely bright. On the 3rd day, Nina called. I wanted you to know I'm ready, she said, her voice steadier than Hannah had heard it before. I've been working with your mother's team, going through everything I remember, every conversation Ethan and I had. I know this is going to be hard, testifying in front of everyone, but I want to do it right. Thank you, Hannah said quietly. I know this isn't easy for you either. It's the least I can do. Nina paused. Can I ask you something? After all this is over, after the hearing, do you think you'll be able to move on? Really move on? Hannah looked at the painting in front of her, at the figure she'd created who was finally free. I think so. I think I'm already starting to. The morning of the hearing, Hannah woke before dawn and couldn't fall back asleep. She made coffee, showered, and dressed carefully in a navy suit that Vivian had helped her pick out. Professional, dignified, the clothing of a woman who knew her worth. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The haunted expression that had been carved into her features for months was gone, replaced by something harder and more certain. The car arrived at 8, and they drove to the courthouse through morning traffic that seemed to sense the importance of the day and cleared a path. Vivian sat beside her, reviewing notes one final time. Ethan found new counsel, Vivian said. Robert Chen. He's competent but not brilliant. He took the case on short notice, which means he's working with limited preparation time. That's to our advantage. And my father? Richard Pierce is good, but he's working with impossible facts. The recording, the assault, the documented conspiracy. There's only so much even a talented attorney can do when the evidence is this damning. Vivian looked up from her notes. How are you feeling? Scared, Hannah admitted, but also ready. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Vivian squeezed her hand. Today, you get to tell the truth. All of it. No more hiding, no more pretending, no more accepting someone else's version of your story. Today is yours. The courtroom was packed when they arrived. Hannah recognized faces from the legal community, reporters she'd seen on the news, and in the back row, Maya and several other friends from art school who'd come to support her. Their presence felt like an anchor, reminding her that she had a life beyond this fight, people who cared about her for reasons that had nothing to do with money or status. Ethan sat at the defense table with Robert Chen, and Hannah was struck by how diminished he looked. The swagger was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. His expensive suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the edge of the table. Graham sat at his own table with Richard Pierce, and unlike Ethan, her father still projected confidence. But Hannah could see the cracks now, the tightness around his eyes, the way he avoided looking in her direction, the occasional glance toward the exit as if calculating escape routes. Judge Moreno entered, and the room fell into expectant silence. We're here for the final hearing in Cross versus Cross, with the additional matter of fraud charges against both Ethan Cross and Graham Locke. Mrs. Locke, you may call your first witness. Vivian stood, and her voice carried across the courtroom with absolute authority. The plaintiff calls Hannah Cross. Hannah walked to the witness stand, her legs steadier than she expected. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. From this vantage point, she could see everyone, the judge, the attorneys, Ethan's furious face, Graham's carefully neutral expression, and in the gallery, Maya giving her a thumbs up. Vivian approached with a gentle smile. Hannah, can you tell the court about your marriage to Ethan Cross? Start from the beginning. Hannah took a breath and began. She described meeting Ethan at her father's charity event, the whirlwind courtship, the pressure to marry quickly. She explained the prenuptial agreement, how Ethan had insisted it was standard, how the attorney who supposedly represented her had been chosen and paid by Ethan, how she'd been given less than an hour to review a 50-page document. Did you understand what you were signing? Vivian asked. No, not really. Ethan told me it was just to protect us both, that it was what responsible couples did. The attorney, Mr. Garrison, told me everything was standard and fair. I trusted them. Hannah's voice strengthened. I shouldn't have. But I was 24 years old, and I believed that the man I was about to marry wouldn't lie to me about something so important. Vivian pulled out a document. This is the prenuptial agreement you signed. According to this, you would receive approximately $200,000 in the event of divorce, correct? Yes. And at the time, what did Ethan tell you about his assets? He said he had about $3 million in total assets. Real estate, investments, business holdings. So $200,000 seemed not generous, but not unreasonable either. And what have you since learned about his actual assets? That he has between $47 and $52 million. He lied by a factor of 15. A murmur went through the courtroom. Judge Moreno made a note. Vivian continued, walking Hannah through the marriage, the gradual isolation, the financial control, the way Ethan had slowly convinced her that her art wasn't real work, that she should be grateful for what he provided, that she had no value independent of him. When did you first suspect he was hiding assets? Vivian asked. About 2 years ago. We were at a dinner party, and someone mentioned a property development in Costa Rica. Ethan got very quiet, very tense. Later, when I asked him about it, he said it was nothing, just a failed investment he didn't like to discuss. But the way he reacted, it didn't feel like embarrassment. It felt like panic. Did you investigate? I tried, but Ethan controlled all the finances. I didn't have access to bank statements or investment records. Anything I asked about, he dismissed as me being paranoid or not understanding business. Hannah met the judge's eyes. He was very good at making me doubt my own perceptions. Let's talk about the loan from your father. When did you first learn about it? 3 days ago, when my mother's forensic accountant found the documentation. I had no idea it existed. Vivian pulled out more documents. These are papers you signed approximately 3 years ago, in February 2023. Do you remember signing them? Hannah looked at the papers and felt her stomach turn. Her signature was there, clear and undeniable, right next to Ethan's. Yes, Ethan told me they were routine property tax documents that needed both our signatures for filing purposes. Did you read them before signing? No. I was preparing for a gallery show and I was stressed and distracted. Ethan said it was just a formality, and I trusted him. She looked at Graham. I trusted both of them. These documents, in fact, placed a $2 million lien on your home in favor of Graham Locke. Did you know you were signing that? No. If you had known, would you have signed? Absolutely not. That's my home. I would never have put it at risk like that. Vivian returned to the plaintiff's table and picked up a tablet. Your Honor, I'd like to play the recording of the conversation between Hannah Cross and Graham Locke from 6 days ago. Judge Moreno nodded. Proceed. The recording filled the courtroom, Graham's voice smooth and confident, laying out his offer, admitting to the strategic nature of the loan, threatening to seize the penthouse unless Hannah complied with his demands. When it ended, the silence was profound. Vivian let it sit for a moment before continuing. Hannah, the voice on that recording, can you identify it? That's my father, Graham Locke. And when he grabbed your arm at the end of that meeting, how did that make you feel? Frightened, angry, but mostly it made me realize that he'd never seen me as his daughter. I was just another asset to be managed, another piece in whatever game he and Ethan were playing. Vivian's questioning continued for another 30 minutes, building a comprehensive picture of deception, manipulation, and conspiracy. When she finally said, "No further questions," Hannah felt exhausted but also strangely lighter, as if telling the truth had physically removed weight from her shoulders. Robert Chen stood for cross-examination, and Hannah braced herself. But his questions were perfunctory, almost gentle. He knew he was defending an indefensible position and seemed reluctant to attack Hannah too aggressively. He tried to suggest that she'd been more aware of the finances than she claimed, but Hannah's answers were consistent and credible. After 15 minutes, he gave up. No further questions. Richard Pierce was more aggressive. He questioned whether Hannah had really been deceived or whether she'd simply not paid attention to documents she was signing. He suggested that the recording was a setup, that Hannah had deliberately provoked Graham to get him on tape saying incriminating things. Ms. Cross, isn't it true that you went to that restaurant specifically to record your father? I went to that restaurant because my father asked me to meet him there. I recorded the conversation because I'd learned not to trust him at his word. But you were trying to trap him. I was trying to protect myself. There's a difference. Pierce tried several more angles, but Hannah held firm. She'd lived this story, survived it, and no attorney could shake her from the truth of her own experience. When she finally stepped down from the witness stand, Vivian gave her an almost imperceptible nod of approval. The plaintiff calls Nina Hale. Nina entered the courtroom looking terrified but determined. She wore a simple gray dress and no jewelry, and when she took the oath, her hand trembled slightly. But when Vivian began questioning her, Nina's voice came out clear and steady. She described meeting Ethan, believing his lies about being divorced, discovering the truth about his marriage. Then she detailed the text messages, Ethan bragging about hiding money, discussing the offshore accounts, explaining how the prenup would keep Hannah from ever getting her greedy hands on his real assets. Did Mr. Cross ever discuss his business relationship with Graham Locke? Vivian asked. Yes, he said Graham was a silent partner in several of his real estate developments. He said it was convenient because Graham could provide capital without requiring official documentation that might complicate things with his wife. Did he specify what complications he meant? He said that if Hannah ever figured out how much money was involved, she might ask questions or hire a lawyer. Keeping Graham's investment quiet meant keeping the total assets quiet. Vivian pulled out printed copies of text messages. Are these the messages you provided to our investigative team? Nina looked at them and nodded. Yes. Can you read this one, dated January 15th of this year? Nina's voice wavered but held. It says, "Meeting with Graham tomorrow to finalize the Costa Rica deal." Thank God Hannah's too stupid to ask questions. By the time the divorce is final, I'll have everything offshore and she'll be lucky to get bus fare. The courtroom reacted. Gasps, murmurs, the sound of reporters typing furiously. Ethan's face went red, and he leaned over to whisper urgently to Robert Chen, who looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. Vivian continued methodically, entering text after text into evidence, each one more damning than the last. Nina confirmed that Ethan had told her about hiding cryptocurrency, about shell companies in Panama, about properties purchased under false names. Did you ever witness conversations between Ethan Cross and Graham Locke? Once. They met at Ethan's office about 4 months ago. I was there because Ethan and I had plans afterward. They didn't know I could hear them, but the door wasn't completely closed. Graham was asking about the timeline for the divorce when Ethan planned to file. Ethan said he was waiting for the perfect moment when Hannah would be most vulnerable and least able to fight back. What else did they discuss? Graham said something about the lien being insurance, that even if Hannah somehow got a good attorney, she'd never be able to keep the penthouse. They were laughing about it. Nina's voice hardened. They thought it was funny, planning how to destroy her. When Robert Chen cross-examined Nina, he tried to paint her as a scorned mistress seeking revenge. But Nina held firm. "I'm not here for revenge, Mr. Chen. I'm here because I was complicit in something terrible, and I'm trying to make it right. I slept with a married man. I believed his lies. And when I found out the truth about what he was doing to his wife, I had a choice. Stay silent and protect myself, or speak up and face the consequences. I chose to speak up." Chen had no effective response to that kind of honesty. Richard Pierce tried to discredit Nina's testimony about Graham, but the text messages were clear. Graham's name appeared dozens of times in Ethan's messages to Nina, always in the context of business deals and strategies to hide assets from Hannah. After Nina stepped down, Vivian called Marcus Whitmore, the forensic accountant. For the next hour, Marcus walked the court through the intricate web of Ethan's hidden assets, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the properties purchased under corporate names. He presented charts and graphs and bank statements, building an undeniable picture of systematic fraud. In your professional opinion, Mr. Whitmore, was this level of asset concealment accidental or intentional? Absolutely intentional. This required years of planning, sophisticated knowledge of international finance law, and deliberate steps to avoid detection. This wasn't someone making innocent mistakes. This was someone building a system specifically designed to hide wealth from his spouse. When the evidence phase concluded, Judge Moreno called for closing arguments. Robert Chen stood and made a half-hearted attempt to argue that the prenup was valid regardless of asset disclosure, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. He sat down after less than 10 minutes. Richard Pierce was more vigorous, arguing that Graham's loan was a legitimate business transaction and that the recording of his conversation with Hannah was inadmissible. But even he seemed to recognize the futility of his position. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. Then Vivian stood for her closing argument, and Hannah watched her mother transform into something magnificent, a force of legal precision and righteous anger. "Your Honor, this case is about more than money. It's about two men who conspired to trap a young woman in a marriage designed to serve their financial interests. Graham Locke introduced his daughter to Ethan Cross knowing exactly what kind of man he was. He facilitated a prenuptial agreement designed to leave her with almost nothing. He made a strategic loan that gave him leverage over her home. And when she finally found the courage to fight back, he threatened her, assaulted her, and tried to coerce her into dropping fraud charges to protect his own interests." Vivian walked to the evidence table and gestured to the mountains of documentation. Ethan Cross spent 13 years lying to his wife. He hid $47 million while telling her they needed to be frugal. He gaslit her into believing her instincts were wrong, her perceptions flawed, her value negligible. He froze her accounts, canceled her credit cards, and tried to leave her destitute so she couldn't afford to defend herself in divorce proceedings. And he did all of this while planning his exit strategy with her own father. She turned to face Ethan and Graham directly. These men believe they're entitled to do whatever they want without consequences. They believe that charm and money and status place them above accountability. They believe that women like Hannah, talented, intelligent, deserving women, exist to be controlled and discarded when convenient. Vivian's voice dropped, became almost gentle, which somehow made it more powerful. But they're wrong, because Hannah Cross is not the woman they thought they could destroy. She's the woman who recorded her father's threats. She's the woman who found the courage to call me after 15 years of silence. She's the woman who stood in this courtroom and told the truth despite knowing it would cost her the only family she thought she had. She walked back to the plaintiff's table and stood beside Hannah. Your Honor, we're asking that the prenuptial agreement be invalidated in its entirety due to fraudulent financial disclosure. We're asking for equitable distribution of all marital assets, which means Hannah is entitled to half of the $47 million Ethan Cross tried to hide. We're asking that the lien on the marital home be declared void and fraudulent, and we're asking that both Ethan Cross and Graham Locke face criminal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud. Vivian paused, letting the silence build. But more than any of that, we're asking this court to send a message that financial abuse is real abuse, that trapping someone in a marriage through deception and control is not acceptable, that women who fight back against men who try to destroy them deserve justice. She sat down, and the courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Moreno looked at her notes for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of judgment. I've been a judge for 23 years. I've seen thousands of divorce cases, hundreds of fraud allegations, and more examples of human cruelty than I care to remember. But this case, this systematic, calculated conspiracy to defraud a woman by her own husband and father, this is among the worst I've encountered. She looked at Ethan. Mr. Cross, you stood in my courtroom weeks ago and laughed at your wife. You mocked her for being unable to afford an attorney. You were certain that you'd win because you'd rigged the game in your favor. You were wrong. Then she turned to Graham. And Mr. Locke, you are a disgrace. As an attorney yourself, you knew exactly what you were doing. You used your knowledge of the law to trap your own daughter. You facilitated her exploitation, and when she fought back, you assaulted her and threatened her home. Judge Moreno opened a folder and began reading from prepared notes. The prenuptial agreement is hereby invalidated due to fraudulent financial disclosure, coercion, and unconscionable terms. Hannah Cross is entitled to 50% of all marital assets, which, based on the forensic evidence presented, totals $23.5 million. Ethan made a strangled sound. Robert Chen put a hand on his arm. The lien placed on the marital home by Graham Locke is declared void and fraudulent. The property is awarded to Hannah Cross free and clear. Ethan Cross is ordered to vacate the premises within 48 hours. Judge Moreno continued, her voice relentless. All of Ethan Cross's assets, including offshore accounts, shell company holdings, and cryptocurrency wallets, are to be frozen immediately. A full accounting will be conducted, and any assets found beyond what's already been documented will be added to the marital estate for division. She looked at both defendants. Additionally, I am referring this case to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. The evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and perjury is overwhelming. Both Ethan Cross and Graham Locke should expect to face criminal charges. The gavel came down like thunder. Court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits to file their stories. Ethan was shouting something at Robert Chen, who was already gathering his materials with the clear intention of never representing Ethan Cross again. Graham sat motionless, his face ashen, while Richard Pierce spoke urgently in his ear. Hannah felt Vivian's arms come around her, pulling her into a tight hug. You did it, Vivian whispered. You won. We won, Hannah corrected, holding her mother close. They stood together while chaos swirled around them, and for the first time in 13 years, Hannah felt truly free. Outside the courthouse, Vivian gave a brief statement to the press while Hannah stood beside her, silent but present. The questions came rapid fire about the assets, the conspiracy, what would happen next. Vivian answered with professional precision, making it clear that this was a victory for all women trapped in financially abusive marriages. When they finally made it to the car, Hannah let herself collapse against the seat, exhausted and exhilarated. What happens now? She asked. Now? Now we start the process of actually recovering those assets. Ethan will fight every step of the way, but we have court orders. The money will come." Vivian smiled. "And now you get to decide what you want your life to look like." Hannah thought about that as the car navigated through traffic. What did she want? For so long, her life had been defined by what other people wanted from her. Graham's desire for control, Ethan's need for a beautiful accessory, even her own attempts to be what she thought a wife should be. "I want to paint," she said finally. "I want to focus on my art, have my gallery show, maybe teach classes. I want to build a life that's actually mine." "Then that's what you'll do." The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and asset recovery. The DA's office did indeed file criminal charges against both Ethan and Graham. Ethan tried to flee the country and was arrested at JFK Airport with a fake passport and $300,000 in cash. Graham hired the best defense attorneys money could buy, but the evidence was insurmountable. Hannah attended the preliminary hearings but felt oddly detached from them. This was justice being served, but it wasn't her justice anymore. Her justice had come in Judge Moreno's courtroom, in the validation that she'd been wronged and the recognition that she deserved better. 6 weeks after the final divorce hearing, Hannah stood in Louise Chen's gallery in Soho, surrounded by her paintings. The opening night of the group exhibition had drawn a substantial crowd: art collectors, critics, friends, and curious observers who'd followed her story in the news. Maya stood beside her, grinning. "You did it! You're actually here, showing your work, living your life. I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without you. Without all of you." Hannah looked around at the friends who'd supported her through the darkest times. "You kept reminding me that I was more than Ethan's wife, that I had value independent of him." "You always did. You just forgot for a while." The painting that drew the most attention was the one Hannah had completed just days after the final hearing, the figure breaking through barriers into light. A collector offered $40,000 for it on the spot, but Hannah declined. "It's not for sale," she told him. "That one's mine." Vivian arrived fashionably late, accompanied by her team and several friends from the legal community. She found Hannah and pulled her aside. "I have news. The DA reached a plea agreement with Graham. He's pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. 3 years in minimum security, restitution of $1.2 million to you for the fraudulent lien." Hannah absorbed this information. "And Ethan?" "Refusing to plea. He's going to trial. His new attorneys are arguing that he was simply protecting his business assets, that the prenup was valid, that he's the real victim here." Vivian smiled coldly. "They're going to lose spectacularly, and he's looking at 5 to 7 years. "Good," Hannah said simply. "Then, thank you, Mom, for everything. For coming when I called, for fighting for me, for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you." Vivian's eyes glistened. "You're my daughter. I would have moved heaven and earth for you if you'd asked. I'm just grateful I got the chance to prove it." They stood together in the gallery, surrounded by Hannah's art and the life she was building, and Hannah felt something settle into place. This was who she was. Not Ethan's ex-wife, not Graham's daughter, not a victim of financial abuse. She was Hannah Cross, artist and survivor, woman who'd fought back against impossible odds and won. 3 months later, Hannah sat in the penthouse that was now legally and completely hers, looking at the letter that had arrived that morning. It was from a foundation that provided legal assistance to women in financially abusive marriages, asking if she'd be willing to speak at their annual fundraising gala. She thought about everything she'd learned, everything she'd survived. She thought about the women who were still trapped the way she'd been trapped, who didn't know that silence could be weaponized against them, that prenups could be challenged, that they didn't have to accept the stories their husbands and fathers told about their worth. Hannah picked up her phone and called the foundation director. "I'd be honored to speak, but I'd also like to do more. I want to create a fund, legal fees, living expenses, whatever women need to leave abusive marriages safely. Can we talk about how to set that up?" By the end of the conversation, Hannah had committed $2 million of her settlement to establishing the foundation. It would be called Second Chances, and it would help women who thought they had no options discover that they had every option. That evening, she met Vivian for dinner at a restaurant neither of them had been to before, Neutral Territory, a place with no history or ghosts. They ordered wine and talked about everything and nothing, rebuilding their relationship one conversation at a time. "I'm selling the penthouse," Hannah said over dessert. "It's beautiful, but it's not mine. Not really. Every room has memories I don't want to keep." "Where will you go?" "I found a loft in Brooklyn. Huge windows, great light, enough space for a real studio. I can paint there without feeling like I'm hiding." Vivian raised her glass. "To new beginnings." "To new beginning," Hannah echoed, and they drank to the future. A year later, on a bright October afternoon, Hannah stood outside the federal courthouse in Manhattan and watched as Ethan Cross was led away in handcuffs. The jury had convicted him on all counts: wire fraud, tax evasion, perjury, conspiracy. The judge had sentenced him to 6 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole before 4. He'd looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit, the swagger completely gone, replaced by the reality of consequences he'd never believed would touch him. Hannah felt nothing as she watched him go. No satisfaction, no anger, no lingering pain. He was simply a man who'd made terrible choices and would now pay for them. His story was separate from hers now. Graham had already served 8 months of his 3-year sentence. He'd written her twice, letters full of justification and blame and carefully worded non-apologies. Hannah had burned both letters without reading past the first paragraph. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. She walked away from the courthouse and took the subway to Brooklyn, to the loft that had become her sanctuary. The walls were covered with new paintings, bolder now, brighter, full of color and movement and joy. The figure breaking into light had been joined by dozens of others, each one telling stories of transformation and strength. Nina had visited once, months earlier, to apologize in person. Hannah had accepted the apology and suggested coffee sometime, though they'd both known they'd never be friends. Some connections were born from trauma and didn't survive healing. But Maya was there constantly, and other friends from art school and new friends from the foundation Hannah had started. Her life was full in ways she'd never imagined during those dark months when Ethan had frozen her accounts and tried to crush her spirit. That evening, as Hannah painted in her studio with music playing and late autumn light streaming through the windows, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer. "Ms. Cross? This is Jennifer Martinez. I'm going through a divorce, and my attorney suggested I call you. She said you have a foundation that helps women in situations like mine. I don't have money for a good lawyer, and my husband has hidden everything, and I don't know what to do. I'm sorry to bother you, I didn't know who else to call." Hannah set down her brush and sat down, giving Jennifer her full attention. "You're not bothering me at all. Tell me what's happening, and we'll figure out how to help." As she listened to Jennifer's story, the financial control, the gaslighting, the systematic isolation, Hannah recognized her own history reflected back at her. But this time, she had resources. This time, she could help. "Here's what we're going to do," Hannah said, already mentally cataloging which attorneys in Vivian's network would be perfect for this case. "First, we're going to get you connected with legal representation. The foundation will cover the costs. Second, we're going to make sure you have a safe place to stay and money for immediate expenses. And third, we're going to show your husband that you're not as helpless as he thinks you are." Jennifer's voice cracked with relief. Thank you so much. I was so scared that I'd end up with nothing, that he'd win." "He's not going to win," Hannah said firmly. "I promise you that. We're going to fight, and we're going to make sure you get what you deserve." After they hung up, Hannah returned to her painting with renewed purpose. This was her life now, creating art that spoke truth, helping women find their voices, building something meaningful from the ashes of what Ethan and Graham had tried to destroy. She thought about the woman she'd been when she first walked into that courtroom, sitting alone with an empty chair beside her, broke and terrified, and certain she'd already lost. That woman had believed she was weak, worthless, entitled to nothing. But that woman had been wrong. Hannah Cross had never been weak. She'd been strategic, patient, gathering her strength for the moment when she could strike back effectively. She'd been silent not because she had nothing to say, but because she was choosing her moment carefully. And when that moment came, when Vivian walked through those courtroom doors in her white suit, when the evidence was presented and the truth was finally spoken, Hannah had been magnificent. She picked up her brush again, adding final touches to the painting she'd been working on. It would be the centerpiece of her next solo exhibition, scheduled for spring. The title was already decided: Reckoning. Outside her windows, Brooklyn sprawled toward the Manhattan skyline, the city that had witnessed her destruction and her resurrection. Somewhere in that city, Ethan sat in a cell, learning that wealth without character was worthless. Somewhere, Graham was learning the same lesson. But here, in her loft filled with light and paint and possibility, Hannah Cross was simply living, creating, helping, becoming whoever she wanted to be, answerable to no one but herself. The silence she'd carried for so long wasn't weakness. It had been the calm before the reckoning. And now the storm had passed, leaving only clear skies and new beginnings. Hannah smiled, dipped her brush in silver paint, and continued creating her future.